Councillors, good morning. We will commence today's meeting of the 871st Planning and Regulation Committee. It is 9:22. Good morning to committee members, to visitors. As always, good morning to all city officers present. Today we have Acting EGM Luke Connery in the chair. Luke, good morning to you. Folks, a slightly lighter agenda than normal, but plenty of important items to get through as always. So we'll jump straight in. I have no attendance or apologies to deal with. I'm not aware of any leave of absence requests. We'll go to item 3, seeking confirmation of the minutes of the 870th round. Councillor Young is happy to move those. A seconder. Councillor O'Neill, all those in favour. The minutes of the previous round are confirmed. Can I just check, does anyone have any issues with those minutes they wish to raise at this time? Very good. I have no conflict of interest declarations that have been preloaded for me. I'm checking for the public record. Is there any conflicts that any councillor wishes to raise at this time? In that case, we'll go to the starred items. I'm in your hands, councillors. What would we like done star today? I'll go from my left to right. Councillor Young. 5.1 and 6.5, please. 5.1 and 6.5 for Councillor Young. Councillor Gates.
6.3 and 6.4, please.
6.3 and 6.4 for Councillor Gates. Who was next? 6.1. Okay. Councillor Martin. 6.1. Councillor Young did that one already. Okay, so confirming that everyone is happy to leave 6.6 and 6.7 starred. Move Councillor Gates, second Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour? Against, the starred items are dealt with. Councillors, we will move on to item 5.1, which is the committee forward schedule. Councillor Martin, I think you might have had a question in regards to 5.1.
I do, Chair, thank you. On the forward schedule, councillors would be aware of the general business item I raised in full council around the recurring canal discoloration and construction dewatering in Palm Beach, and it's scheduled. The report's scheduled for the 6th of October 2026. So I just have a couple of questions on that. But before I do, and with thanks in advance to the chair for allowing it, I would like to play a quick video because I have shared photos with councillor colleagues for the general business, but I would like to share a video that I was sent by a resident yesterday afternoon after I spoke to them yesterday morning, and I have witnessed this. So just to give some context around what's going on, this was taken yesterday afternoon at 3:46 from the local residents, and feel free to press play and I can continue to chat. I have witnessed this myself on the weekends, and it has been recurring over a number of periods. And now I know the city are doing some work, and so I've got some questions, but I just thought it was really prudent to give councillors the opportunity to see why it's become such an issue. And it is the discharge from the stormwater, which is linked to dewatering of construction sites, and it has been ongoing. So obviously I raised the general business, there's a report coming, but given this is happening even just since yesterday, the question is to officers, through you, Chair, are city officers aware of this, and what's being done in the meantime, noting a report is coming?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Martin, as you may be aware, the city is quite focused on this particular issue around the construction dewatering at the development site at 6th Avenue, Palm Beach. There has been an ongoing compliance investigation, really looking at whether the site is complying with approved conditions, as well as some community concern related to water quality. There has been early action taken in regards to that particular site, and we are considering that our ability to conduct enforcement action in accordance with the legislation that we follow. I think the biggest aspect to that is that we are focused on preventing further impacts as quickly as possible, and enforcement notices that have been issued by council have required immediate changes to treatment systems, increased monitoring, daily reporting, and technical upgrades to the dewatering process. The city is continuing to remain actively involved and monitoring the site really closely. Our investigations are ongoing. In terms of the report itself, there's currently a response to your general business item scheduled for the next Planning and Regulation Committee on the 6th of October. We are looking to potentially request that to be rescheduled to round 873 on the 27th of October, just to ensure that the most recent situation and our enforcement options are able to be integrated into that particular report.
Okay. So if the report is pushed back for ongoing compliance and investigations, seeing what's happening, what I suppose, and I'm careful here. I don't want to prejudice any of council's investigations, but for the community, is action being taken even though the report is coming? Like, is officers doing as much as they can within the powers? Because certainly that's what I'm asking, requesting officers to do, given what's occurring there.
Through you, Chair. Councillor, the general business item, the construct of the report presentation is happening in parallel to continued investigations and enforcement. So that enforcement is being looked at concurrently and will continue to occur once and if the requirements of the legislation are met. I won't talk to the specifics of this particular instance. I don't want to prejudice any ongoing investigation, but in general terms, as you're aware, specifically for development compliance, we have the options of, I guess, escalating up to and including prosecution, and there's the things that will be considered in the future.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. If I could just finish with a comment, not for officers, but thank you for that, and I appreciate the ability to share it and highlight it again. I know I've talked about it, but for the local residents there, I really feel for them. It's not only is the discharge coming out, but it's really affected that area. The actual build-up there is collected, and it's really turning into an unpleasant environment. So I feel for the residents. They just want it to stop, and I get there's a justice process. So thank you for the update, but we just want it to stop. So thank you.
Councillor Martin, appreciate that. Was there any other questions in regards to the forward schedule, councillors? In that case, I'm happy to move the forward schedule, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour? The forward schedule is carried. Councillors, that takes us to item 6.1, policy position draft animal management local law. Mr. Connery, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not familiar with all officers that just came into the room, so maybe you or Joe or someone would like to introduce the team that's with us today.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors. I'd like to introduce the local law development team who are working on the local law framework review project. So we have Laura McGilvery, who is our animal management policy lead. We have Cassie Murphy, who is our city laws policy lead, and we have Kat Ovskrey, who is our local law development lead, and we have Anton Cappy with us, who I'm sure a lot of you know, who is our coordinator of the animal management team, and Jim Dixon, general manager of our city activation branch. I thought you might. Through the chair, would you like a presentation? Today, we are seeking in-principle endorsement of the key policy positions that inform the draft animal management local laws. This is the first suite of draft local laws and policy positions to be considered by the Planning and Regulation Committee as part of the Local Law Framework Review project. Throughout this project, our focus has been on modernising the framework, improving operational effectiveness, and ensuring the local laws are fit for purpose. The proposed changes have been developed through extensive review, stakeholder consultation, and legal assessment. The review of the animal management local law has been substantial. We've held more than 70 stakeholder workshops, engaged with over 10 stakeholder groups, assessed 140 provisions, and reviewed 124 definitions. To also inform your consideration, councillors, all relevant documents were circulated on the 21st of July and briefing sessions were made available to provide further content if required. A key objective of our review has been to create more contemporary, streamlined and user-friendly local laws. We have aligned our drafting approach with the state's model local laws. We have updated terminology to improve clarity and consistency, and we have consolidated administrative provisions into draft administration local laws. We have removed duplication with the state legislation and in particular the Animal Management Cats and Dogs Act, and we have aligned all remaining local law provisions with the Act to ensure its consistency. We've also included transitional provisions for existing arrangements that are in place, and penalty units contained within the draft local laws have been subject to an initial review and will be further considered holistically alongside penalty units across the rest of the local laws. Any proposed changes to penalty units will be brought back to committee for your consideration. The key policy changes can be grouped into 6 areas: animal control areas, duty to provide proper enclosure, koala area designations, animal noise nuisance, keeping of animals, and commercial horse stables within the Bundle Equestrian Precinct. I will now step you through each of these key changes and explain the rationale behind them. The first proposed change introduces additional powers relating to animal control areas. These changes would allow the city to temporarily suspend an animal control area designation, temporarily prohibit animals from specific areas, and make administrative amendments to existing designations where appropriate. These powers are intended to improve operational flexibility and enable the city to respond more effectively to maintenance works, special events, environmental considerations, and public safety issues. The proposal also simplifies administrative updates by enabling minor corrections to be made, and it also formally recognises horse exercise areas within the Animal Control Area Register. The next proposed change relates to animal enclosure requirements. Currently, enforcement can be limited where an animal is being kept temporarily at a location that is not considered the owner's usual premises. This change extends the requirement to provide a proper enclosure to any premises where an animal is kept, even on a temporary basis. This reflects operational experience and addresses accountability in situations where an animal escape may occur from a temporary location. This change aims to improve community safety and provides clearer and more consistent compliance expectations regardless of where the animal is being housed. This review also proposes changing the method for designating koala areas. Rather than requiring a local law amendment, koala areas would be established through council resolution and managed through a supporting register. This approach mirrors the process already used for animal control areas. The benefit is greater administrative efficiency and flexibility while still maintaining transparency through a register that would be available on the city's website. The existing local law relies heavily on a prescribed duration threshold when considering whether animal noise is a nuisance. Our review proposes retaining the duration threshold while broadening the factors that an authorised person may consider when forming an opinion about whether animal noise is a nuisance. In addition to the duration threshold, consideration may be given to the frequency and the nature. In addition to this, we are also proposing a formal animal noise monitoring program to be introduced to address repeated noise nuisance complaints. These changes would address current enforcement limitations, allow nuisance complaints to be assessed on an individual basis, and provide a clear pathway for ongoing monitoring, intervention and escalation where compliance issues persist. This review also proposes changes regarding circumstances where keeping animals is prohibited or requires approval. For dogs and cats, a clear upper limit of 5 animals over the age of 3 months would be introduced, unless a person is a registered breeder, holds an appropriate development approval, or is an animal welfare organisation. For livestock, such as cattle and pigs, the prohibition threshold would increase from properties of 2,000 square metres or less to properties of 4,000 square metres or less. The intent of these two changes is to reduce amenity impacts, environmental issues and nuisance complaints associated with keeping larger livestock on smaller residential properties. And the final key change relates to commercial horse stables within the Bundall Equestrian Area Precinct. The proposal removes commercial horse stable operations from the animal management local law and moves those activities to be regulated under the administration subordinate local law alongside other commercial approvals. This creates a clear distinction between commercial business operations and recreational horsekeeping, which would continue to be regulated under the animal management local law. The proposal also ensures that all properties within the precinct require approval regardless of allotment size, creating greater consistency across the precinct. Subject to committee in principle endorsement today, the next steps will be consideration by Council on the 15th of September, and following that we would include this draft Animal Management Local Law into the proposed to make report, which is anticipated to be presented to Committee and Council in July 2027. Following that would be the formal state government consultation and public consultation as well as part of that formal local lawmaking process. Thank you.
Questions for officers? Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, Joe, for walking us through that, and thanks to your team for the work that's been done to date. You mentioned that there's been engagement with 10 stakeholder groups for this work. Can you give us a list of who they are, either now or later, please?
Through the Chair, the 10 stakeholder groups include the operational team, so the animal management enforcement team, also the environmental compliance team, the natural areas management unit, the koala team that manage the koala designations.
Sorry, so you mentioned those in the report too, I think, but they're all internal. I thought there was some external stakeholder groups like equestrian groups or...
No, not at the moment. Yeah, this is just draft, and I guess this is the internal stakeholder component. So,
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I mistook that. I welcome the broadening of the consideration for animal noise nuisance. You mentioned other vocalisations of dogs, so it's not limited to barking necessarily. But it appears to me this might give a lot more requirement for an officer to exercise a subjective evaluation, and doesn't that kind of put them and the process at risk?
Through the Chair, we're providing the tool for officers to actually use the local law for compliance and to achieve compliance. In this situation with animal noise nuisance, the key outcome that we're trying to achieve and officers are trying to achieve is compliance, and that is the first step to that is the education and awareness. So it's actually working with the community and members of the community to get that compliance. What we're actually doing in this space is providing the officers with additional tools. Instead of just having one mandatory requirement, which was that a dog would bark for 6 minutes within an hour, and that was actually, that's in place right now. It's very difficult for officers to enforce that. We're opening that up to have the frequency and the nature, which, as you mentioned, might be the howling, might be whining, and that would be 15 within 1 minute is what we're actually looking at in that policy change.
Oh, so the policy will include those numbers?
Correct.
So I'm concerned about any subjective evaluation by an officer because I think it exposes them to, and the whole process, to complaints and abuse. So yeah, if there's numbers about howling or other vocalisations, shall we say, then that's good. The last question I have, Chairman, if you don't mind, is about the koala areas. I'm familiar with these, but not really, in the sense that I don't know where they exist. Have we got maps that can be provided, or can we access that information through the GIS?
Through the chair, yes, we do have maps. They're actually included in the schedule, so we can send them out.
I'd appreciate that for my division at least. Thanks, Chairman.
Councillor Curtis was next, and Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. And my first question was very much similar to Councillor Young's. So it sounds like there's going to be maybe like a framework that sits subordinate to the local law that will allow the officers to have something concrete to assess against, but there's a level of flexibility. Would we be able to be provided that framework and the thresholds that will be within that, so we have some kind of an idea as councillors of what would meet the threshold of being a noise nuisance? So I was a little bit surprised in the part where it talks about repeated noise nuisance being defined as at least twice in 28 days.
So through the chair, I can actually give you that information right now. So under the current provisions, animal noise is deemed a nuisance if it exceeds 6 minutes in any 60-minute period between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. and 3 minutes in any 30-minute period between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. What we're proposing is introducing, for example, including dog barking for more than 15 times per minute, howling or whining more than 5 times per minute, or other animals producing more than 15 vocalisations per minute. The noise may be continuous or intermittent. So that would actually be in the new local law as a guideline example for officers to be able to use.
Great.
So that is the specifics.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then my second question was just 5.2.6 when we talk about the upper limits of animals. Because when I read it, it talks about dogs. It says dogs and cats, and so when I read it, it felt like it read like you could have 5 dogs and 5 cats, but then you said 5 animals. So
It is, sorry.
Yes,
Through
which is it? I just wanted to be clear, and will that be very clear in the local law too?
Through the chair, it is 5 dogs and 5 cats. That's the limit we've put in place.
Councillor Curtis, was that your questions? Councillor Wilkinson was next, and Councillor Fowler, and we'll come to the end to Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. And I think both Councillor Young and Councillor Curtis have more or less got out what I was seeking. Just in relation to the animal noise nuisance, I think that this is a really good step forward. Unfortunately, I'm sure I'm not the only councillor that gets a number of noise complaints from their community. But just in relation to where you're deriving all of those, and I'm really glad you outlined those particulars as far as the framework goes, what piece of legislation are we pulling that from? Is that state legislation that we've pulled that from and changed? Is that the reason for why we've been able to bring in this flexibility to, I guess, what we're looking to bring forward under our local laws?
Through the chair, it's actually come from the operational teams. So we've listened to them and the difficulties that they have in gaining compliance in this space. Also community, we've looked at the data and what the community is saying and the numbers. So 3,500 complaints a year we receive on animal noise nuisance. So that's where it's actually come from. We've also spoken with a lot of other local government organisations, and they have the same struggles that our officers are having as well. What we're doing is we're actually taking the lead on this. So we're being quite innovative in putting forward a change to the policy position and the local law that currently exists to assist our officers and assist the community with this issue that is raised quite regularly.
Thank you for that response. That's brilliant. I guess just in that regard, given all the different stakeholders we have engaged with internally, we don't see any potential conflict, given that we are leading the way in this regard. Do we see any kind of potential conflict arising with the approach that we're taking against any external legislation that might hinder our ability to do this?
Through the chair, not through any legislation. What we do as part of the formal local law making process is that we go out to public consultation. When we do that, we also identify those external agencies that may have, interest in the change to the local laws, and we offer them the opportunity to have a briefing and to put input into the actual local law framework that we're developing. So we absolutely do that at that point in time.
Brilliant. And just to touch on what you've said there about that community engagement, that will be the next piece down the track as far as we're getting our draft together at the moment. But I just wanted to get that on the public record so that the community can see we're leading the way. We've taken on their advice by some of the feedback, obviously, that they've been giving us with the 3,000 complaints we've received. But that will absolutely be something that the community gets to have their say on in the future as well.
Through the chair, we've also extended the timeframe for that public consultation. So normally there's a legislative requirement of 21 days. We're actually allowing 3 months for public consultation so that we can make sure that it is a real thorough process that we undertake. And then we would also be bringing back to this committee all of those issues that are raised or concerns that may be raised from members of the community, and we will have recommendations against those.
Councillor Fowler, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I just had a question just around the designation suspensions. So the draft law, it says we're allowing animal control area designations to be suspended for up to 12 months. A range of different reasons we would need to do that. I guess I just wanted to ask if you could explain what safeguards will exist so the power is only used when it's genuinely needed. And I guess whether divisional councils will be consulted as part of that process. And thirdly, I just had a little bit of a concern with the 2 days notice. I was wondering if we could, perhaps from the policy position perspective, maybe look at a 5-day notice or a 7-day notice just to give the community a little bit more time of when we're going to be shutting down their beloved dog park. So a little bit in there, but yeah, mainly just about how we know they're genuinely necessary, whether divisional councils will be consulted and if we can extend that community notice period at all.
Through the chair, delegated authority would be at general manager and above, and there would be some stringent criteria for that decision to be assessed against, yes. And in relation to the timeframe, we can certainly look at 5 days.
Thank you. That would be really good, Chair. I just had another question, if I can, about the animal numbers and livestock piece. So I know that we've got in the 5 animal cap, but what I wanted to question is just around the livestock, 2,000 metres squared to 4,000 metres squared. So I guess my concern is those in our community that have between 2,000 metres squared up to 4,000 metres squared and currently have these types of animals on their property. When this local law comes into effect, is there a grandfathering, or how are we managing that process with our community members who may have that size land and may have that use happening at the moment?
Through the chair, absolutely. We have included transitional clauses within the new local law so that there will be grandfathering for any of those permits that currently exist.
So do we know at this stage what length of time that would be or what that might look like, or we will wait until the laws are developed?
Once the laws are gazetted, so that would be in around May 2028.
So we don't have any further detail on what that might look like at this stage?
In what regard?
What the terms of that permit would look like. We don't.
So if they have a current permit, that permit stays in place and doesn't change.
So nothing changes if they already have that. It's only for new owners of that size land.
From when the local law is gazetted and in place, any new applications for a permit will be against the new local law. Any previous permits issued would remain unchanged.
Great. And I only had one last question about the koala areas. I just wanted to know how, if we do have a change in a koala area designation under council resolution and that impacts residents, how would residents be informed that they're now obliged to have, fenced off areas in their yard for dogs, the koala climbing fence equipment? Has that been factored in, and how would that be communicated?
Through the chair, that is part, I understand that is part of the existing process, where if there are any changes, there is intense consultation with any residents that are affected, directly or indirectly.
Great, thank you very much.
We need a new local law that stops councillors from asking a last question 3 times. Terrible joke. Councillor Martin, you were next, and Councillor
I
Gates.
struck off the ones that were asked, so I won't ask them again. Just on this, I know the recommendations just in principle support endorsement right now, but I tend to agree with Councillor Fowler's the notice period on the days. Is there any reason, is there any operational reason that you see that 7 days wouldn't be appropriate notice? Like, would that hamstring you for any operational reason?
Through the chair, I'll get a representative from the operational team to answer that one.
Through the chair, operationally, the option of having less days is for the an example is recently we've had some works undertaken, and to tell or have the ability to push people back 7 days has been challenging. So more often than not, we would try and give as much notice as possible, but it's just in emergency cares or something along those lines.
Okay.
So just for context, I'm guessing a lot of the time that's the city doing works in its own land is what we're talking about. We're not talking about externals. We're talking about giving permission to a branch of council to do work somewhere is what we're talking about.
That's correct.
Just for, I think that context is important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose my main concern is the powers that to give to amend or suspend the animal control areas, and I think it was been raised around, there's a really great consultation piece right now with councillors and the community, is making sure that if the delegation exists, and understand why it's needed, but councillors are informed when that delegation is used and there's an appropriate notice period. So is there any ability in this, and I know it's just in principle now, but to ensure that when that delegation is exercised that the local councillor is informed? I think, well, that's my personal view, that would be beneficial. Is that a policy? Can we work that into the document?
Through the chair, absolutely.
Okay, so we can take that as done.
Councillor Gates was next.
Thanks very much, Chair. Through you, I'm still concerned about the numbers of animals that can be kept on a property, because the footnote on page 29 says, for clarification, these limits apply separately to dogs and cats. For example, a person may keep up to 5 dogs and up to 5 cats, subject to requirements. And yet on page 30 it mentions it being illegal to keep more than 6 dogs unless you've got an approval. So, like 10 animals on a property, are there size restrictions where that might be approved?
Through the chair, there is, Councillor Gates, there is assessment criteria that is applied to a permit. So anyone can have 2 dogs and 2 cats without a permit. Between 3 and 5 dogs or cats, you need a permit. So as part of that permit application process, there is an assessment criteria that is followed, and that's around, it looks at the size of the property, the enclosure that is provided on the property, the minimum standards that are required for the keeping of animals. So there is quite a strict assessment process that is undertaken when there is a permit received. And then page 30 actually relates to animals being prohibited. So what we're saying is that you cannot have more than 5 dogs or cats on a property. At the moment, the current local law does not have any cap in it. So that's what we're introducing, is to actually put a cap in the new local law that says that it is prohibited to have more than 5 dogs or more than 5 cats on a property.
Okay, that's why I'm confused, because in the footnote it says, for example, a person may keep up to 5 dogs and up to 5 cats, subject to approval, but that's not in fact so if it's prohibited.
Through the chair, 6 or more is prohibited. So you can keep between 3 and 5 with a permit, so with an approval.
Okay, sorry, I'm still confused.
Councillor Young, then Councillor Curtis.
Sorry, thank you. I found the koala area maps on page 126 and subsequent, but I don't understand them because they're so tiny. And the font is unreadable in some. So these grey areas, the koala areas that are mapped, like they're extensive. probably 6/10 of the city.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's correct, Councillor Young. If you go onto the city website, there's an interactive map that you can view all the koala sanctuaries and protected areas within the city. And you're right, it is a fairly significant area. But the best port of call is to go to that interactive map, and you can see the overlays and where the impact is
Thank
occurring.
you. So theoretically, if your property is mapped as grey here, like a koala area, which is a very extensive array across the entire city, I mean, entire suburbs, each one of those property owners has obligations to have appropriate fencing and protection for koalas. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's correct. It's all dependent, obviously, on the perimeter. Largely the perimeter is where the majority of the accountability lies, but certainly if you're within those zones, there is some level of obligation. It's very much dependent on, obviously, whether you're close to that perimeter or in the centre of a suburb. But yes, there's an obligation on the majority of those residents to have some form of mitigation strategy in place or protective strategy in place.
Can I just confirming, so those maps that Councillor Young is referring to, they already exist. This isn't new mapping. This is the existing mapping. This is already in place. And Councillor Young, just for the record, what pages are you on, just for those following?
Page 126 and following, and you'll see that the areas of grey mapping are very extensive. For example, all of Nerang, but not the forest.
Strong advocacy from the Division 5 Council to protect koalas.
Oh, look, I'm happy for it to be there, but I just don't think anybody would know about it, and I just wonder how effective this is as a measure if people don't know about it, councillors don't really know about it, and there's an obligation on property owners, but I don't know how that's ever executed.
Through the Chair, it's currently within the subordinate local law, so it has been through the process of a local law amendment and has been endorsed and approved at council.
Councillor Young, any further questions?
No, that's it.
Councillor Curtis, you're next, and Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. On the cats, you don't have to register a cat, but if you have more than 2, you have to have a permit. And now we're saying that you absolutely can't have more than 5. It must be incredibly difficult to prove that that cat belongs if they're not registered to the person. Has that been a challenge in the past? Like, have we ever pinned somebody for having more than 2 cats successfully? Or is there a fine for not having a permit for more than 2 cats?
Through the Chair, you can apply for a permit for more than 2 cats and up to 5 in the new local law. At the moment, the current local law, you can apply for keeping of excess animals greater than 2. So there is no actual cap. There is no limit in the current local law, and you can apply for that permit, and there is a cost associated with that permit application. And
being found to have that amount of animals and no permit has a PIN.
Yes. Anton, I'm sure, can talk to that. But yes, through the Chair, there is then compliance action that is taken against the owners, the keepers of the animals.
Thank you. And I'm not sure where we landed on the day's notice, but obviously if there's engagement with the local councillor, I would be very comfortable with the smaller window, particularly in those examples. I think I spoke to Luke Honoré about fixing a footpath. I certainly wouldn't want to have to push that out an extra 3 days if I'm notified and they're going to be shutting it down for those purposes. So I'm not sure where we landed, but I'd like to see that flexibility in there to do a reduced period in certain circumstances when the council is supportive.
Through the Chair, there will be consultation with each divisional councillor, and at the time of that consultation we can certainly have a conversation around the timeframes, and depending on the situation they could be addressed on a case-by-case basis.
Through the Chair, just to quickly add to that if I can, and please correct me, Joe, if this is incorrect, but I think the intent is actually that was the minimum time period. Wherever possible, we'd be providing as much notice as we could, but I think the team foresaw that there would be situations where there was emergent issues that needed to be addressed pretty quickly, hence that minimum time frame.
Councillor O'Neill, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe a silly question, but is there sort of a leeway time that if your cat or dog has a litter, and it's, you know, they have to stay with their mother for a certain period of time. So, and if we've got a a rather vocal neighbour or something carrying on, is there a sort of time limit that you've set somewhere?
Through the Chair, yes, it's up to 3 months of age.
Okay. And can I thank you for the horse exercise areas? That's going to be quite welcome in my area. Thank you.
Councillor Gates.
I just wonder, could I get a copy of the Coomera map? I can't make out head nor tail of the map in the attachment, and I would like to see it. Does our development approvals have the requirement, like, for example, the undeveloped land north of the Coomera Town Centre, would there be conditions in that it was approved a long time ago, that require the fencing to be undertaken if it's mapped? I mean, I don't recall. It was before my time representing Coomera that development approval for what's now the Bob L land was given. I just wonder, are there conditions to support what is proposed in terms of fencing to protect the koala population?
Able to answer that one today, or do we need to seek some clarity on that one?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair.
Not to my knowledge, but keen to take that on notice and do a thorough check.
Jim agrees.
Thank you.
Good question.
Appreciate
We'll
that.
take that one on notice and come back with a response to all councillors on that one. Folks, any further questions for officers? Otherwise, seeking a move for the item. Moved by Councillor Curtis, seconded by Councillor Young. Councillor Curtis, do you wish to open debate at all?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much to the officers for bringing this one forward. Constituents would be pleased to know that there's been serious consideration of noise nuisance complaints over previous years, and I'm sure all councillors have experienced frustration of residents who've got to that stage, and it was so prescriptive that it probably wasn't fit for purpose, and it's great to see that there's been a change in that space. There's some clarity on upper limits of the maximum amount of dogs and cats that can be kept. There's some great koala protection improvements and flexibility in our ACAR designation that will allow us to respond practically when it's suitable, and for all those reasons I think that it should be supported to progress through the local law.
Speaker against the motion? Councillor Curtis, wish to close it all? If I could just ask, obviously the time frame of this is quite long and there's a lot of work to be done in between. I'm aware there are going to be several touch points of where councillors will have the opportunity for briefings on this one. I've asked Luke and Jim to set out the time frame for that so that they can be put in your calendars early, because I'd like to hope that when we get to kind of July next year, that it's not because our calendars are so busy we didn't get the chance to take those briefings. So they're going to get those time frames out nice and early so you can see when there's the key touch points with councillors where they're seeking your input, in the hope of when we get to July next year it's good to go. Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried unanimous. Moves us to item 6.2. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning. Through the chair. Good morning, councillors. Today we are here to discuss the city's place-based management approach to people experiencing homelessness. In April or May this year, Council adopted the place-based management approach with a commitment that we would come back to committee and council to discuss how we're going to utilise these resources, the additional resources we have, to proactively patrol key public spaces. And today we also want to discuss the ongoing engagement we're having with our partners, including the Gold Coast Homelessness Network, and also discuss a proposal to allocate $100,000 of funding to the homelessness sector, which was granted to us through the budget process last year. So last year, council approved about $1.46 million of recurrent operational funding to support the team to deliver the place-based management approach. As you can see on the screen there, this has delivered the city a coordinator position to manage this particular service, an operations leader to manage the day-to-day activities of our team. We will have 6 city laws officers patrolling the city during the day. That's an additional 2 officers to what we've had previously to regulate any local law breaches associated with these camps. And we'll now have 4 city laws officers to patrol the city after hours, so from about 4 p.m. to midnight, to address illegal camping and other breaches of local law. Also, this funding has allowed us to engage a business support officer to support the day-to-day administrative resources that are needed in this space, as we do receive about 4,000 requests per year of homelessness compliance requests and about 3,000 illegal camping requests. Just to note, councillors, the place-based management approach ensures council operationally are still delivering our role, which includes public space management and local law enforcement. This approach does see us strengthen our relationships with key stakeholders. So we have a really close working relationship with the Department of Housing and United Care, which I'll touch base on shortly. And we are ensuring that when we engage individuals in our public realm, they are getting the offer to connect to services immediately, especially when we engage with people who are new that we haven't met before, or those who are really vulnerable. We'll connect them up with the right organisations, but we'll also offer that to those repeat offenders before taking compliance action. A key element of the resources in the place-based management approach is the ability to start prioritising proactive patrols for some of our key public spaces across the city. So what we've developed is this framework on the screen. So it's a transparent data-driven framework that helps us identify what public spaces we can start patrolling with our finite city laws resources. And how we've done that is create 3 key factors, basically, which we're going to assess key public spaces. The first factor is request volume. So how much are we hearing from our community about breaches of local law in a particular public space? And each of these factors can be scored high, moderate or low, depending on if they meet the criteria. The second factor is how significant is a location. So is it a premium destination park, a high priority beach, a key centre in our city plan? Is it an area that our community are using quite frequently or our visitors are using quite frequently? Thirdly, the third factor we assess is environmental value. So is the area a conservation area? Have we invested significant city funding in restoring a particular area that we want to ensure we can proactively patrol to reduce any large camps and engage and connect with people? So basically what we do is we put a public space through this framework and it gets a score out of 9. If it scores between 7 and 9 points, it's been identified as a Category 1 higher priority area, which means we'll proactively patrol that particular space at least twice per week, so multiple patrols per week. If it scores 5 or 6 points, we'll patrol that space as a Category 2 1 time per week. All other public spaces, which would score a 3 or a 4, which is the majority of the city overall, would be a Category 3 space. And these areas will still react and respond to complaints only. So we won't be proactively patrolling those spaces, but we will be waiting for a request from the community. What we expect to see in some of the success measures which we'll be measuring through this process is the theory behind this would be if we're proactively patrolling the key Category 1 and 2 public spaces, we should see a reduction in waste collected from those sites by having early engagement with anyone who is establishing a camp in that location. And also we should see a reduction in customer requests. So again, if we're proactively engaging with a person early, we can connect them up to services or educate them on the local law and discuss with them how they must comply with the particular local laws. Just by way of a very, very quick example, Public Park A over the last 6 months received 45 requests, which means it scores 3 points under that category. That park also has a community facility on its site. It's not near a beach, it's not a premium destination park or in a regional or specialist centre. Therefore, it scores 2 points. And thirdly, it's been classed as a bushland reserve, which we'd engage with our natural areas team. That would give that particular park a score of 7, which means it falls under the Category 1 category, and we'd patrol that park multiple times per week. A couple of key points with this framework. It's not rigid, so while we have identified a key list of public spaces, we want to continue to engage with councillors if a new area does pop up that we need to proactively patrol, and also if there is an emergent issue that does pop up in our community, then we can address that and continue to proactively patrol that space. Our partnership approaches are critical in this space. So while we play a role in public space management and local law enforcement to address homelessness more broadly on the Gold Coast, we do connect in with our partners, including the Department of Housing and Public Works and Uniting Care Queensland, who we meet with today every Tuesday to discuss specific cases. In those meetings, we'll have conversations around any new or vulnerable people that we've identified to pass that information on to those services, who will head out and connect those people up and offer them the support they need. But alternatively, they'll also give us intel where people haven't accepted services so we can continue compliance action. So it's a really productive relationship that's working quite well. We'll head out once a fortnight. Our City Laws officers will go out with outreach officers and do joint site visits as well. We've had some really positive discussions with the Gold Coast Homelessness Network over the last 2 to 3 months. So Luke and I have been out and engaged with them on site, and we've now ensured that we are going to ensure our data is transferred through Uniting Care into the Rough Sleeper Working Group, which is really critical. The Rough Sleeper Working Group gets the data that the city is providing weekly, so they have a clear picture of the scale of homelessness on the Gold Coast. So the data, important to note though, data sharing can only occur if someone gives consent to pass on their private information. So our officers will always ask individuals in the public realm if they consent to us passing that information on. Most do, and then we'll pass that information on to the relevant organisations. Finally, councillors, during last year's budget process, council endorsed $100,000 to support the homelessness sector. So we are proposing that the city establishes a one-off grants program to allocate those funds out to relevant organisations in the homelessness sector. The purpose of the program is to provide timely, outcome-focused financial assistance that strengthens the capacity of the broader homelessness ecosystem. Funding is quite broad, so the criteria in this particular grant, the guidelines that you'll see in the attachment are quite broad because we really want to hear from the sector. Where are there gaps? Where can this funding support you in your day-to-day organisation and support delivering benefits for the City of Gold Coast? So an expression of interest process is proposed to be launched in January 2027, and a maximum amount of $25,000 has been identified to be awarded to a single organisation. That amount gives us the opportunity to engage and allow multiple organisations to apply for this grant and utilise that to support their communities across the Gold Coast. We have had various community organisations reach out to us about some of the innovative ideas that they're working on at the moment. So this is an opportunity for the city to support various groups in this space. Applicants will be required to address several criteria when expressing their interests, which will include clearly identifying the gap that this funding will support, clearly identifying the benefit that the funding will support as well. So how is it going to go towards supporting homelessness on the Gold Coast and supporting individuals who are sleeping rough? And they'll also need to clearly be able to demonstrate how they can measure some of that success. So we do want to measure how this funding is delivered and be able to report back on the success of the grant program. So, councillors, that brings us to our recommendations today. So we're asking that council endorse the place-based management approach and the framework we've determined to prioritise public spaces for patrols. Note our reintegration with the Gold Coast Homelessness Network and through sharing data to the Rough Sleeper Working Group. And finally, endorse the proposed grants program to support the homelessness sector.
Thank you, Matt. Questions for officers? Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Firstly, Matt, thank you for the presentation and thank you for your whole team. I think you do a phenomenal job in balancing what we need to do in this city to address those who are unfortunately facing homelessness. Just in relation to the categories, I just wanted to ask, I can understand the point scoring system and I think that that's a good way to try and initially approach it. How often are we reviewing those categories as well for localities? So if people continue to report into the city and it might change destinations, how do we go about, if somewhere's a category 2, for instance, if there's still ongoing complaints and it's quite, increased, would that be able to potentially jump up to category 1? And also, what's the best way for people to continue to report to the city? How should they tell the city if they're seeing issues in particular areas?
Through the chair, So we are committed to review this framework and the locations in the framework every 6 months. We will do an initial review after 3 months. So once we implement this with our new resources, we'll do an initial review after 3 months. Then every 6 months, we want to relook at the data and engage with yourselves as councillors around, are there any other hotspots that we need to proactively patrol in your particular divisions? The best way for members of the public to submit requests to the city is through the Report a Problem app. There's a category there called homelessness, which people can report, and that will come straight through to our team, where our team can then engage with somebody on site, offer them the support and the service connection that they may need, but also, if needed, take the relevant compliance action under the local law. Really key point, it's important to note, all of our compliance action considers a human rights act. So our officers will do a human rights assessment on site, consider the person's human rights before giving them a direction under the local law. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Matt. I know we've talked about, as a council, looking at state government public areas and GTMR road reserves and things like that, and we were seeking advice, further advice from the state government if they were willing to help. If they are willing to help and they do provide us some funding, will some of their areas be included in these priority areas and the same, methodology used?
Through the Chair, to note, councillors, we're bringing a report back to this committee on the 27th of October at this stage, which is to discuss if the city and council are willing to take on regulating illegal camps and illegal camping on state-controlled roads and land. So that is coming to this committee in a couple of rounds' time. Depending on, initially the thought was no, this was going to be looking at our public spaces, but that's something that we can discuss with TMR and look at if there are key sites on the state-controlled layout or road that we could proactively patrol and ensure that the resources and the funding is committed to the city so we can deliver that.
Yeah, thanks for that, because sometimes, as you know, you realise the public don't really realise who owns what. All they can see is what they can see. And is it possible during your review time about particular areas that councillors can approach you to see if you could review something a little bit earlier if they're having problems, like Balinga, for instance?
Through the Chair, yes, so we're happy to engage with councillors on your relevant divisions. It's probably important to note we will be very careful on how many public spaces are in this framework. There's only so many resources to patrol across the city, but happy to have the discussions if something does pop up with each councillor in their division.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just start with questions. Thanks, Matt. I think you mentioned a total of 7,000 reports in the past 12 months. Is that correct?
Through the Chair. So we've had 4,000 specific to homelessness or illegal camps in our public spaces, about 3,000 illegal camping, so people living in their vehicles across the city as well. So 7,000 total, but not all of the illegal camping requests are people experiencing homelessness. That might be a traditional person travelling across the city who sleep in their car at night, then move on.
Thank you. I just want to understand the patrols a little bit better. So that comprises who?
Through the Chair. So the patrols will be a physical patrol by our city laws officers. So for Public Park A that we talked about, we'll look to schedule in their time and they'll do a physical and visible walkthrough every week. So they'll walk through that park, whether they might be engaging with another reactive request in the area or they might proactively patrol that park at a specific time each week. And they'll be walking through trying to identify if any new camps or new individuals are being established. When they do that, they can engage with those individuals, again, offer that connection up to services like we've talked about, but also educate them on the local law and educate them on their requirements under that local law. So hopefully what we can see with that is we won't get such large campsites being developed because we're going to proactively be engaging with people early in those locations that are highly visible.
So the patrol is very much about the engagement with the people present. What about monitoring of toilets or other public facilities? You know, there's often reports about drug paraphernalia being left behind, sharps and that sort of thing.
Through the Chair, yeah, if we're patrolling a public space with infrastructure or assets of ours, we'll definitely check those just in case anyone is potentially camping in that location. If we identify any drugs or syringes, we'll collaborate with our city cleaning team to make sure that is cleaned up immediately and public safety is restored for our community.
So city cleaning isn't part of your patrol, but you've got that connection with them, of course.
Through the chair, yeah, correct. So city laws officers will do the patrol and we'll call in city cleaning as needed. An important innovation to note over the last 6 months, we now have a dedicated city cleaning team that support our city laws officers, and they're dedicated to clearing up abandoned campsites. So they will come out with us day in, day out, and when we have achieved compliance at a site, they'll immediately come in with us to remove that any waste that the people have identified from that location.
And those guys won an award last week at the City CEO's Excellence Awards.
Through the chair, yeah, I believe they did, and very well deserved.
That's all I've got for questions. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I just had a question just around the grants program, which I'm supportive of. Just wanted to get some understanding as to why the rationale was for like an expression of interest campaign as opposed to a normal community grants program, and what we're hoping to achieve by running it in such a different format.
Through the chair, we have established this proposal, a bit like what we did with the defibrillator grants program, where we went out to specific organisations who could utilise the funding. We want them to express their interest and put in and apply for the grants, to use the grant program mechanisms, and we'll be engaging with that team. But we can go out quite directly to those organisations and get them to identify and meet the criteria to determine how this funding could support them.
Okay, and just with regards to it being one-off, do we see this being perhaps, if there was success in this program, something that you would be potentially looking for recurring year-on-year funding through our budget process?
Through the chair, I think looking at this potential program and looking at the measures and success, then that might be something that we could bring back as a recommendation to this committee, whether to continue that or not.
Thank you. And Chair, just one last comment. I just thought when we're talking about KPIs in this space, I think it's really important that we look to the measurable impact. And I think that the community impact and the reach is how this should be measured. So how many people are they helping? What is the reach? What is the impact? I think is really important when we're looking at funding decisions and how they should be made, but also when we're equating the success of those funding decisions. Thank you.
Questions?
This recommendation.
Councillor Young's happy to move the item, so Councillor O'Neill's happy to second. Councillor Young, wish to speak to it?
Love to. Thanks. Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate the report and the energy that you're putting into this. You're building a good team, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. You visited my office, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and then we had dialogue last night. Thank you for your flexible approach, and I'm really glad to see the re-inclusion in the Gold Coast Homelessness Network of the city as a recognised partner contributing to great outcomes. And I'm sure that's been achieved through your moderate and considered approach. Thank you. As I mentioned to you last night, I'm getting a lot of pushback from people about drug paraphernalia in parks. And we've got obviously the issue of people in camps, and sometimes there's a bit of hostility towards the general public who might go to the park for recreational use and they're feeling a little bit intimidated. But it seems to be worse in some places than others, of course. So I broached that question with you about the opportunity to review the ranking, and that's been raised by a couple of councillors today, so I'm glad that you've accommodated that opportunity for us to reappraise the ranking that's been applied at this point. The last thing I just wanted to mention was that with the $100,000, I was really pleased that Council supported that. The Mayor was very quickly supportive of that notion when I introduced it to the budget, and Councillor supported it eagerly. I think it's a good initiative, but I'm very concerned, and I've expressed this to you, about any monies going away to administrative processes within these agencies, and they naturally have to employ people and pay for them, and they've got provisions, so we just need to minimise the amount of money that dissipates into that management sphere, and the most of it gets applied to the individuals. In that regard, I'd just like to put on offer my services to assist, if it's necessary, in the evaluation of those offers that are received. In support of that, I was the chairman of the NERANG Neighbourhood Centre for about 20 years, so I've got a good understanding of how these agencies work and the kind of interaction that they have and the sorts of things that they'd be including and not including in their proposals. So if that's needed, I'm available. Thanks, Chairman.
Speaker against the motion? Speaker against or wish to speak for it? Comment from Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair, and I guess I will speak for it, but it is more just a brief comment that I wanted to add. Firstly, again, thank you to the officers. I think I echo a lot of what even Councillor Young has just said there. Matt, you do a phenomenal job in this space, and I know my community particularly has appreciated the fact that you've engaged with them directly when required, and you've even joined with me for several meetings across the community when issues have arisen. This is an issue that does get, talked about regularly in my community, and residents are concerned not only about the welfare of those experiencing homelessness, but genuinely about ensuring that our public spaces remain safe, welcoming and accessible for everyone. What this report outlines is a coordinated and balanced approach that focuses on managing public spaces while strengthening engagement with the homelessness service sector. I'd also add we will absolutely be continuing to work with the state government, in particular the Department of Housing and Public Works, who holds primary responsibility for housing and homelessness services, to get those individuals who are facing homelessness a better pathway to a roof over their head. As I've said in previous speeches I've given in this chamber on the subject, I believe this approach is an improvement upon what we had previously endorsed. These additional funds will help our teams engage the people needing that homelessness support earlier, while we proactively patrol areas to make sure we're engaging with them as soon as practically possible. And again, we will continue to work with our state counterparts in the not-for-profit sector to assist those who are really doing it tough. After attending this year's Connect to Home event, which I know I saw many familiar faces at, very welcoming, of course, at that event, and the number of different organisations involved in that Gold Coast Homelessness Network that I was able to talk with one-on-one to just hear their feedback on this approach as we've embraced it as a city. And it was really pleasing to hear that the engagement that we're having is improving and that there is actually strong support for this approach we're taking today. I'm also pleased to read in today's report the positive discussions around the Gold Coast Homelessness Network, who have agreed to re-engage with the city in relation to the Gold Coast Zero, the Rough Sleepers Working Group. So I think this is very well presented as far as the report today, and I welcome the recommendations and will support it for the reasons outlined within the report. So thanks.
Councillors, I think given the subject matter and the impact it has across all divisions on the coast, I'm happy to take comments from anybody else. Councillor O'Neill, wish to comment?
Thanks, Chair, and I really welcome this report and I totally support it. It is a growing problem all across the Gold Coast and I certainly see it in my area, but I think this will give my residents a lot of comfort knowing that we're increasing the staff, we're increasing patrols, we're prioritising areas that we know are targeted by illegal campers. And I would like to call out your team and the team that we rely on every day to help us. And the coordination that you have with our local police too is to be commended. So absolutely fabulous news that this is all happening. And look, the services are doing a fabulous job. They always have done, and I'm sure they'll continue to do. But a lot of this is really getting above them as well. They're really struggling to try and keep up with getting people help. So hopefully that just the small amount of money that we can give will be helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else? If you'd indulge me, I wouldn't mind on this one because I'm confident of having a lot of media to do on the item. First of all, as always, and I'm really pleased all councillors have acknowledged them, but Beck, Matt, Luke, the entire team that works in this space, it is very fair to acknowledge that I think of all the roles that officers have in this organisation and the complexity of it and the heat that can come from the community and the different angles that comes from, I think what you deal with in this space on a day-to-day basis is probably the most extraordinary example in the city. I know I have definitely found that while there are lots of ratepayers who express that they'd like to see the city do more to support people who are rough sleeping or homelessness, I'd be lying if I said I didn't get just as much correspondence from people wanting us to take an even harder stance than this. It's a very interesting one to deal with in each division, and it does affect every division. And I'd make that really strong point that this program and the increase in local law officers is not just about the coastal strip or the foreshore. While they are some of our most visited parks and open green spaces, there is an intention with this to make sure that there is enough operational capacity to get out into the divisions, to be able to get out to Nerang on the west side of the highway, to be able to come up to Yatala, to be able to get into all divisions, because it does affect all divisions in different ways. The city has a role to play in managing what is an incredibly complex issue. Understanding what those individuals are going through or have been through. For those in the community who dismiss them so quickly as just someone sleeping in a tent in a park or sleeping in a car, to not understand that person's background or that family's background. There's some incredibly complex backgrounds, especially the incredible rise in older females sleeping in cars in the city, the rise in families sleeping in tents in parks in this city. So I just encourage everyone, including those in the community, to remember that we are talking about human beings here in the end. But I do acknowledge that we have a role as local government, as the city, to ensure that our public spaces, our parks, our playgrounds, our beaches are safe, accessible and welcoming for everybody, whether they're ratepayers, families, tourists, event goers, but that also includes the safety of those parks and open spaces for people who are sleeping rough. That there are some who are not the ones causing issues, who are not the ones with massive camps, who are not the ones doing anything antisocial, and there is an element of their safety in this as well, that we are very much targeting the minority of those who are homeless or sleeping rough, who cause a huge amount of the complaints and issues. We heard today a number of 7,000 complaints, 4,000 related to homelessness and 3,000 for illegal camping. That's a huge amount of complaints. Of all the different things that we receive complaints on, that is well and truly up there. We have a responsibility as a city to act on those complaints. Where they might come from, the reasons for that person making a complaint is not the subject matter. If a complaint is made, we have a responsibility to investigate and to act accordingly to make sure that local laws are being followed. I want to make the point that that comes at a cost. As we've heard today, the increase in staff needed to have enough operational capacity to deal with this issue and to deal with those complaints has seen the need to increase our amount of staff and increase recurrent expenditure by nearly 1.5 million for those staff to address this issue. Not insignificant, but it is what is required to make sure that we have the operational capacity to handle this day and night and weekends and to deal with those complaints in a timely fashion. I'd like to make the point at this time that, because I've definitely received a couple bits of correspondence suggesting that spending this money on more local law officers wasn't the right use of funds and we should have spent it on more direct support for homeless people. I'd like to remind councillors and anyone watching that only last council meeting, possibly the council meeting before, this council also agreed to waive infrastructure charges for a social and emergency housing project in Nerang, delivering 60 social emergency houses to the tune of 1.5 million. That is a real contribution towards social emergency housing in partnership with a community housing provider in the state government. So we're not just spending money on compliance, we've also spent money on the other side of things as well. The $100,000 that's been spoke about today with that grant opportunities is about strengthening cross-collaboration between all those key stakeholders, because there are a lot of key stakeholders in the space in our city doing some amazing work, none of them with enough funding, none of them with enough support from anybody, but that we really see a great opportunity that in data sharing and cross-collaboration, that the limited funding and resources they have, the limited volunteers they have, can we maximise and get more out of all that? To me, that's a meaningful and purposeful use of ratepayer funds, but I'm very open that let's see how this first round goes. Depending on the ideas and how many applications we get, maybe there's other ways that we can continue to be involved. But I suspect one of the most important ways that we'll always be a key stakeholder is through amazing officers like this who are out in the ground and are working in a very collaborative way with all those stakeholders. One other point I'd like to make, because there's been a bit of criticism that just moving people on achieves nothing. For someone who is sleeping rough or is homeless in a park or in a foreshore area that we are aware is on a path to housing. They might be engaged with the Department of Housing. They might be in a transition path to get into housing. We're not moving those people on. If they're not causing a massive mess, if they're not the ones causing any social issues, we work with them until they get into their housing. We really are concentrating on the people who bring in hundreds, if not thousands of kilos of stuff into a park, who spray out over the barbecue areas and completely block off access to barbecues and picnic shelters, who stray into footpaths, who are the ones that are antisocial in those areas. That is number one priority, which is the very pragmatic part about having more operational capacity on the ground to get to these parks more regularly. Is the hope that before someone sets up a camp and before literally thousands of kilos of furniture and other stuff is bought in and an entire campsite is set up, that we are there before they get the chance to do that, that we move them on or make sure that they don't set up a camp so that we don't have the complaints, we don't have the issues that the community feel, and that we are not left with the bill and responsibility of removing all of that stuff from those parks and sand dune areas, which I'm sure you've all seen some of the recent images from the spit of the recent cleanup that we've had to do. The longer term solution, if there ever will be a solution to this, is more housing, more support services, and more coordination across all levels of government. I think it's important to call out that most of the responsibility in this space sits with the state government. We need to be on the front foot with that this is not an area that we are willing to accept a cost shift down to us or an expectation for councils to do more, because we simply don't have the ability, the resources, the expertise to do more in the space. We've been very firm on that and we remain committed to that. We will remain committed to being a key stakeholder in that group with the Department of Housing, Public Works, United Care Queensland, the Gold Coast Homelessness Network, and many others across the coast who touch on this space. There's one final part that, while not called out in the report today, but I suspect I'm going to do some media on in the not too distant future. You may have seen a response from Moreton Council where they have actually allocated a park for people to go and set up a camp in. I've already received some media questions around if that's something the city is considering. I can confirm for the public record here today for council that it is not something the city is considering at this stage. I think it's fair to say that we are going to sit and watch of how this works up in Moreton. We already have some fairly significant concerns of how that practically works up there and the resourcing requirements on that council to do that. But they've taken that step and we are going to watch and see what happens with that. But I can confirm here today for councillors that is not something that Gold Coast City Council is considering at this time. Councillors, that is more than enough from me. I'll just finish where I started with an acknowledgement of the officers and the tremendous work they do in the space. Councillor Young, do you wish to close debate at all?
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you for speaking so passionately about the matter, and indeed I want to recognise the contribution of all the councillors, and I think it's an indication of our genuine commitment to a very significant problem confronting not only our community but across the whole of the nation. So there's great sincerity there and I appreciate it. It's a difficult mix here and we're trying to get the right balance between compassion for those people who are affected and our obligation to provide public spaces for people to recreate in just regularly. And the big issue for us, of course, is how do we operationalise that? How do we afford that? As well as our other obligations. I think we've put together a good team, we've got good people involved, and they're creating great relationships across the city, not only with our partners, but the people who are most affected. And I'm very happy to endorse the recommendation. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. Councillors, would we like a 5-minute break before we hook into the next items? Meeting adjourned for 5 minutes. Councillors, we are back live, reconvening the meeting at 10:49. We'll move to item 6.3. We welcome Gav and Trina and Sam and Troy. The whole gang's here. Councillor Gates, did you just have questions or were you seeking a presentation?
I have a few questions, if I may.
Yep. So we can just go straight to questions?
Yeah, I don't actually need a presentation, but obviously this item has been superseded by an email that we all received yesterday. Has everyone read that? Okay, well, I had a number of questions because this sort of suggested that version 1 was finalised, and I felt that we had changed that outcome considerably, albeit not by a council resolution, but it was agreed at the workshop last week that we would change the timeframes, and that's been clarified in the subsequent email that we have received. So I wanted to perhaps add a 3 that council notes the updated timeframes for the MPS roadmap as provided to all councillors via email on the 31st of the 8th, 26, just to be clear that the information in that email has actually bypassed what is suggested within this report. I wanted to be, one of the questions I had, is it proposed that version 1.1 will focus on all the issues that have so far not been resolved in terms of density within the planning scheme, the quadplexes, the minimum residential lot size? Will all those things be clarified before we send to the state version 1.1?
Through you to Councillor Gates, that's correct. We're doing as much as we can before we send that version to state. There will be some things that may require further investigation if they're major policy shifts, but we are certainly taking on board all the feedback that we've got through the workshops that are being undertaken now and the briefings on the zoning maps.
Okay.
Could we just clarify, because for those that might be trying to follow this that weren't part of the meeting and haven't seen the email, so when we talk about referring to the state, Councillor Gates, are you talking about the preliminary version or are you talking about a state interest?
I'm talking about the version 1 was to go as a preliminary version,
okay, that's
there
right.
was objection to that because it contained information that we had not yet endorsed.
Yep, that's good.
So
I thought that was important to clarify for councillors that we're referring to the prelim
That's
draft.
right.
Yep.
So now I understand that version 1.1 will focus on trying to include the matters that have yet been endorsed by council but are closer to the mark for what we hope to see delivered. Just before I give the wording again for that number 3, I recognise the confidentiality of our discussions about the planning scheme. So it was with great concern that I saw Saturday's paper where the acting mayor was championing the removal of the 50% uplift test, but there was no suggestion in that article that I could see about what might replace it. And I think that's really unfair, that the uplift test, for those who weren't here, was delivered in the city in a real attempt to place the ceiling on height because of our performance-based scheme. Now, clearly, if we don't have that, we have to have some mechanism, or anyone can apply for anything. And we also have to set the code accessible heights. So how far are we off deciding what the code accessible heights in areas that qualified for the 50% uplift are? Because that's pivotal in any decision that we make about the 50% uplift, because we don't want a free-for-all for everyone to be able to apply for everything and just ignore the benefits that the 50% uplift provided. Because in my understanding, in Councillor Caldwell's time, we never once went over that 50% uplift, not once. So it did what we hoped it would achieve in the early stages. It's something that we really need serious consideration for. And I don't know how it happened, but maybe.
So just, is there a question for officers, or is
Well,
it
the
more of a
question is that going to be top of list for our discussions at the workshop so we can clarify a position and it can be made public what is proposed to replace it?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Gates, that's correct. The workshop on the 9th, we will be discussing the building height methodology and approach. That is still in draft, that has not been finalised, and we'll be working through a number of options, which also includes removal of the 50% uplift.
Okay. Did you want me to give you those words again? That
Words,
Council
please.
notes the updated timeframes for the NPS roadmap. It's new planning scheme, N for Nelly. Roadmap as provided to all councillors via email on the 31st of the 8th, 26. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, so we've got Councillor Gates' number 3, which makes absolute sense to align with the email that was sent to all councillors from from Luke yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. So number 3, someone happy to second Councillor Gates' change of recommendation? Councillor Wilkinson, thank you. Councillor Gates, you've said a bit, do you want to do an opening for debate? We'll just take a vote.
I just think I would like to just say that I think it's really important that we are completely honest with the community if we're discussing any element of changes that may be affected with the planning scheme, because it's been something that has been of great concern in certain parts of the city, and we have to have a sensible outcome as a result of the opportunity to introduce a newer and more appropriate planning scheme.
Speaker against the motion? Councillor Martin, question?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, no, just a question to officers, and it might be quite minor, but you've got the collection of all the previous resolutions that we're tracking through this process. The key resolution that I think is missing from the log is the LGMS. So that resolution is not in there of the 10th of March, and to have it cohesively all together tracking this process, I'd love to get it in there. Is there any reason why that 10th of March LGMS resolution's not in there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can only assume it's an oversight. There's no intention to not provide a full picture of what the resolutions have led us to currently, so we can certainly update that for the next meeting round.
Thank you. That would be great.
There. Thank you.
Any other contributions? Councillor Gates, wish to close debate? In that case, debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Including Councillor Fowler's in agreement too. We can record that. Motion carried unanimous. Councillors, that takes us to our first DA of the day, item 6.4. Good morning, team. Impeccable tie choice, Roger. Very good. Brandy, presentation.
Through the Chair, the application I'm here to present to the committee today is an application seeking to amend a development permit for a dwelling house secondary dwelling to a dual occupancy at 750 TALLEBUDGERA Creek Road, TALLEBUDGERA Valley. The subject site is a 35,990 square metre large rural allotment with over 380 metres of frontage to TALLEBUDGERA Creek Road. The site is located in the rural zone and outside of the urban footprint within the regional landscape and rural production area of the South East Queensland Regional Plan. There is an existing development approval on the site On the left is the approval for the dwelling house and secondary dwelling that was approved by officers in 2018. And on the right is the proposed dual occupancy. The key thing to note here is that there is no building works proposed, no change to the access arrangement. It is just a change in the land use that we are considering today. Now I need to talk about some boring planning legislation changes that affect this proposal today because it's relevant to the officer's recommendation. For the last 20 odd years, a dual occupancy was not a supported land use in the regional landscape and rural production area. That is because it was considered an urban activity outside the urban footprint and inconsistent with the intent of the regional landscape area. However, amendments that came in 2017 through the Planning and Other Legislation Amendment Regulation clarified that a dual occupancy is not prohibited development outside the urban footprint, and it can be assessed on its planning merits. In short, without boring you, a dual occupancy was included within the definition of an exempt material change of use under Schedule 24 of the planning regulation, and so was not considered prohibited development. So since August of 2017, you've been able to make an application for a dual occupancy outside the urban footprint, and officers can consider that proposal on its merits. This is the first time that anyone has actually applied for a dual occupancy outside the urban footprint on the Gold Coast since those changes have come into effect, which is part of the reason I'm here today at Council to discuss it with you. So we have a large rural allotment of over 3.5 hectares that has an approved material change of use for a dwelling and a secondary dwelling. Under that approval, the existing dwelling that you can see on the slide was retained as the secondary dwelling because it's quite modest. And a new primary dwelling was approved. Both dwellings were lawfully established and remain on the site today. So importantly, the application we're discussing is not seeking approval for any new dwelling. There's no additional floor area or building work. There's no vegetation clearing or extensions proposed at all. The proposal is simply a change in land use from a secondary dwelling to a dual occupancy. While the proposal results in more than one dwelling on the lot, when you consider the application against the broader framework of the city plan, including the rural zone and the strategic framework, it still achieves the intent of city plan. The application does not increase the density physically established on the land. It only changes the relationship between those two buildings. From a character perspective, officers are satisfied that the proposal will maintain the established rural character and scenic amenity of the area. The site still maintains its extensive vegetated areas and has an exceptionally low site coverage of less than 1%. The dwellings are set back well from all property boundaries and there is no change to the site's appearance or landscape setting. Looking at the existing arrangement, of particular relevance is the relationship between the two dwellings. They are separated by 128 metres and are serviced by separate access arrangements. This arrangement will remain unchanged as part of this proposal. Since 2018, Council's assessment of secondary dwelling applications has evolved through court decisions and planning practice. Those decisions have clarified that a secondary dwelling should demonstrate a clear relationship, a subordinate relationship and nexus to the primary dwelling. Matters such as proximity, connectivity and shared access arrangements are important considerations in our current assessments. And while officers approved this proposal in 2018, the existing arrangements exhibit characteristics that are more commonly associated with a dual occupancy land use due to the substantial separation between the dwellings and their relative independence. If the same proposal were lodged today for a dwelling house and secondary dwelling, officers would have some significant concerns around the proposal's ability to demonstrate the required subordinate and functional relationship between the primary and secondary dwellings. So you could argue that the proposed change application we're considering today aligns the approval with the manner in which development is currently functioning on the site. In response to public notification, no submissions in support or objections were received. So what are the implications of supporting this land use for a dual occupancy outside the urban footprint? You cannot subdivide the site and put a dwelling on each separate lot. There's a minimum subdivision size of 100 hectares in the rural zone. There's also a strong intent within the rural zone that you cannot create any additional lots. You couldn't even do a community title subdivision because we wouldn't support that outcome either. Will we see more dual occupancies in the rural zone? Maybe the odd one or two, but I don't think we're going to see a flood of these application types coming in. We've had this ability for almost 10 years to do this type of application, and this is the first one that the city has received. Any subsequent applications that we do receive would have to be assessed on their merits, and they would need to meet the intent of the zone, as this one does. Lastly, could they add a secondary dwelling to the dual occupancy? Well, the answer to that is no. There's no ability to have a secondary dwelling associated with a dual occupancy land use, and officers have a condition of approval within our recommendation to make that clear. So in conclusion, officers are supportive of this application for the following reasons. It doesn't seek approval for any additional dwellings, building work, vegetation clearing or any increase in the footprint. There are no new impacts resulting from this change application. The proposal simply changes the relationship between the two existing lawful dwellings that are established on the site. The substantial lot size, extensive vegetation, low site coverage and 130 odd metre separation between the dwellings ensures that the site will continue to function and present as a spacious rural allotment. The proposal is consistent with the current legislative framework, which no longer prohibits dual occupancies within the rural landscape and rural production area. And finally, officers are satisfied that the proposal will maintain the rural character, landscape values and amenity of the locality, while providing a planning approval that more accurately reflects the established use on the premises.
Questions for Mr Brown? Councillor Gates was first and Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chairman. My first question is how the secondary dwelling was approved in the first instance, given it's not subordinate to the primary dwelling. So how would that ever happen?
Through you, Mr Chair, the size of the dwelling is probably subordinate to the primary dwelling in terms of scale of the building. On this occasion, the existing secondary dwelling had its own access and there was another access already approved for this lot. Because it's such a large lot and it's got 380 metres of lot size of frontage, they already had separate driveways. I think the other one where the now primary dwelling was proposed was providing access to a shed. So they had existing access arrangements as the current arrangement.
Okay. Can you explain to me if it's exempt from material change of use provisions since 2017, why is there an application now?
It's an exempt material change of use for the purposes of what development can be allowed outside of the urban footprint. So it allows the city to assess the application. It just means that it's not prohibited development outside the urban footprint.
And just another question, if I may, Chair. The secondary dwelling, was that required to be a family member in order to, or could, like this is presumably two homes on one allotment receiving one rates notice. So under the secondary dwelling provisions, were there limitations around who could live in that secondary dwelling?
Through you, Mr Chair, 2017, state government changed their position probably 2022 in relation to being able to rent out a secondary dwelling to persons other than a family member. That was a clarification point. There was always conjecture, Councillor Gates, as to whether you could rent it out or not. Under the old family accommodation 2003 planning scheme, a family accommodation had to be a member of the family. So in relation to our city plan and the current Planning Act and planning regs, you can rent it out to a third party.
So what's the benefit of this change?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have thought about that, and this outcome will allow a building format plan. As Adam has said, there is absolutely no ability to land subdivide. Minimum lot size is 100 hectares. There's 3 types of subdivision that we have in Queensland. That's your fee simple freehold subdivision where you create just a freehold lot. You have a community title subdivision, and you have what's called a subdivision of building. That's your old strata title. We call it a building format plan. So this proposal, they could building format plan both dwellings and be able to sell off. So that's the only benefit they've got here.
So it's a sneaky way around the 100 hectare limit on subdivision. That's the only thing it can be. I have a problem with this because I don't think it's right, but I get what you're saying, that there have been changes to the legislation which put the officers in a position of assessing it under the benchmarks that are established, but it's pretty sneaky. You can see what's going to happen.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, in response to that, Councillor Gates, as Adam and I, we're presenting this today on the basis of saying that we believe that this is not going to open up the floodgates. We actually see this as a very sensible approach to take, where people that want to, under the right circumstances, as Adam has said, there's 1% site cover for this. There's still benchmarks where they have to maintain the very rural environmental open space characteristics of the zone that will always be maintained and put in practice. This allows occupants who want a separate driveway to come in with a proposal that stacks up. If they want to share the same driveway and have a dwelling limited to 2 bedrooms, that's a secondary dwelling. So it provides one more avenue for a bit of flexibility for some very, in our opinion, inconsequential development outcomes. It is allowed under the planning regulations as exempt, and that is, in terms of hierarchy, that is a higher order planning instrument than our city plan. Thank you.
Councillor Young, you had a question?
Yes, just returning to the original decision to allow the secondary dwelling. I am really struggling with that decision, whereby it's clearly not within the distance that it should have been in proximity to the original dwelling, and it has its own driveway access. I mean, these are clear provisions that were in place in 2018, and I can't understand why an approval was granted. I've maintained a very strict focus on that in my division, and had a number of applications rejected or constrained because they didn't meet those criteria. So it's disappointing that this is here. That's a statement. So my understanding is the current government has changed the position on secondary dwellings. We had a fairly tight set of guidelines, and the government said, no, that's not necessary now. So wouldn't it be the case that each of these dwellings might achieve a secondary dwelling outcome?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no. Even with a building format plan arrangement, it is still one lot. So the land use over the site will be dual occupancy. Categorically, a secondary dwelling can only be associated with one primary dwelling. You cannot get a secondary dwelling if this is approved today, there'll be no ability to get a secondary dwelling on this site because the land use over the entirety of the site is still dual occupancy. We would issue an action notice, a not properly made action notice, if we ever received an application for a secondary dwelling on the basis that our characterisation would be that of a multiple dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Neill and Councillor Curtis.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions to either officer. If this had been presented, this application had been presented back in 2018 as a dual lock, would it have been approved?
It was presented to us in 2017, Councillor O'Neill, but if you're suggesting perhaps after the legislation changes, we could have got to the same position we are getting today in terms of supporting the application. But of key note for this particular proposal today is that the dwelling house is already established. There's no new built form proposed, so I guess that would be the key difference in terms of if it were suggested for a new build secondary dwelling in 2018. We'd probably have to consider similar things in terms of, is there any vegetation clearing? Are they able to accommodate their on-site sewer and water, and are there any impacts from this proposal?
So I just want to just test out some of the restrictions if we do have another one come to council like this. And I did ask this to come to committee because, as you know, Adam, when you presented this to me, I went a few months ago, I don't think that's allowed. So I was a little bit taken aback. But so what would be the restrictions for anybody else? Are we talking separate access driveways? Is that one of the restrictions that, like someone who's already got a second dwelling like this one has, if they don't have a second access, that would rule it out for a dual lock? Would that be one of the restrictions?
It could be, through the chair. That's certainly one of the key considerations officers have when we're trying to determine if your secondary dwelling has some sort of relationship or nexus with the primary dwelling. They usually need to share an access arrangement. So previously, probably around the 2017-18, there are some provisions within the secondary dwelling code when you get to the overall outcomes that say that as long as you are utilising an existing access arrangement, you meet the code. So if they had an existing VXO and crossover like this site did that was separate to the primary dwelling, we formed the position that we would support that outcome because they were meeting the intent of the code.
And would there be any restriction on square meterage of a property for a dual lock?
Not for a dual occupancy like there is for a secondary dwelling.
Okay.
So that was my takeaway of obviously this was already existing, but for anyone looking in the future would be anyone that doesn't want to do a secondary dwelling where they're controlled in square meterage or bedroom would be looking to go down this path, but they then trigger how much road frontage they've got for distance between VXOs. Has it got an ability to get a lawful VXO somewhere else because it already had that as well, whereas most rural sites, for whatever reason, can't get a second VXO approved normally.
Yeah, the site we're looking at today is an enormously large site. It's almost 36,000 square metres. You've got a lot of frontage, 380 odd metres of frontage and separate access arrangements that are existing. So no impacts at all from the change to this application, and we would have to consider all those aspects on their merit if we had any other subsequent applications coming in.
So maybe because I'm getting a sense that there's a level of concern, officers have made it fairly blunt that they don't think there's going to be a floodgate of these coming in. But if for some reason that does occur and we see a whole of these coming in, it might be something where we'd have to do an amendment to a planning scheme to put stricter controls around it to deal with that if that occurred.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just in response to that, rural zones, there's an expectation for activity and intensity. You could have a far more intensive development with a shed of 2, 3, 4, 5 times the size of the dual occupancy with staff members and truck movements, that's far more intensive and has far more impacts on the locality than a dual occupancy, where I assure you officers will consider the need to have low intensity protection of environmental and scenic values. I believe there's more assessment benchmarks and more control over the assessment of a dual occupancy than accepted development, which could actually be quite intensive on this site.
Councillor O'Neill, any further questions? Councillor Curtis?
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. So you spoke of a potential benefit of this could be that they could then sell, but then it was also mentioned that it's still just one lot. So how would that work? It would be just sale of a dwelling?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, a building format plan is different from a freehold or a community title. You're just purchasing the building. The remaining part of the site falls within common area, but your actual title, your exclusive area is limited to the curtilage of the building.
So this could be a family where they've just got the kids in the second dwelling. The kids can't get a mortgage on the second dwelling because it's all in one title. So going through a building format plan, they'd be able to get a mortgage on that building. Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct. That could be a scenario.
Which could be the practical outcome they're seeking, is just so that whoever's in that secondary dwelling, kids, parents, someone else can actually mortgage that building. Might be what they're looking to do from it.
Thanks, Chair. And then my other question was, if there wasn't support here today, what the consequences would be? Would that mean that they would now trigger a compliance action on the existing dwelling because it's not compliant with the secondary dwelling approval, or what would be the consequences?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I suppose number one, they could appeal the council's decision if there was a refusal. There wouldn't be a non-compliance because council has actually issued an MCU approval for it. They are in accordance with the approval. I'd just like to add that it was a long time ago. Officers weren't aware of the Elias versus Bundaberg case, the court decision with Boydore Road, where the P&E court has provided guidance to officers on how to interpret subordinate and used in conjunction with. So there's been a lot of water under the bridge since this was approved. And that guidance now means if this application was lodged today, it would be considered to be a dual lock. But you go back in time before these court cases, there was conjecture and ambiguity in relation to how we should assess these applications.
All right. So I'm happy to move the item. Question?
And this may go beyond your ability to respond, but I'm just wondering about council services, which would be limited here, but there must be waste, curbside waste facility or provision. Is there just one service for the whole property, or are there two because there's two houses? Do you know?
Through you, Mr. Chair, services waste, solid waste.
Yes.
Yeah, that's done on a lot basis. So they could apply. And get separate bins as part of the collection, but it is still one lot.
So for the purpose charge.
For the purpose of rates, it is still one charge. Correct.
Do you think it's beyond our legal capacity to impose a second rating kind of
through you, Mr. Chair, it is rural, so there's no obligation with water and sewer, so it is just down to it's a limited rateable service.
So the second set of bins they pay for, and this approval when given would have come with infrastructure charges for that secondary dwelling?
No.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there was an ICN issued for the secondary dwelling that came up with zero because it was part of the exemptions at that time in relation to the infrastructure charging regime. Because we issued an ICN, there is no further ICN for this development because there's no increase in bedrooms.
Yep.
So if an application came in later for additional bedrooms, we could charge an ICN on those additional bedrooms.
Understood. Any further questions?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm happy to move the item. Seek a seconder. Councillor Wilkinson, thank you. Just want to acknowledge this was a request from officers for this to come through committee as well as with the divisional councillor. Obviously, for councillors who don't have rural area, you might not have the contextual connection to it, but I think for Councillor Young and myself and Councillor Gates and Councillor O'Neill, it was important to understand this one and the implications because it does affect really that rural area, especially on the western side of the highway. I appreciate the history lesson from officers. This has been an area in the last decade there has been a lot of change in, both through state government intervention, but also a lot of case law. And I'm not going to suggest all that case law has been particularly easy to understand sometimes, but there has been a lot of case law interventions by the former government and this current government in this space. And what we have here today is a recommendation of approval from officers for this land use change, acknowledging that it doesn't add any extra building footprint to what's already on the site and no additional impacts to the community because it is well established and has been for a decade. Speaker against the motion? Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't be supporting this. I think there will be unintended consequences of this approval. I'm happy to hear from Mr. Sharp that he believes to the contrary, but I know how many requests I receive where people do want a second dwelling on their rural property. It's interesting that this is the very first application in since the change, but I just think it's morally wrong that this qualifies for one set of rates, well, maybe lots of garbage bins. It's just morally wrong in my view, and I can't support it. I hope that Mr. Sharp's right and that there's significant flexibility, if you like, in any future or constraints on any future application that the officers can thoroughly consider should we get a number of applications. But I do think this sets a benchmark we haven't seen before and will be a precedent into the future.
Speaker for the motion. Close debate by acknowledging Councillor Gates' comments. Councillor Gates has obviously got a long history in the areas of the city she's represented in understanding how those rural areas are critical to those areas and what they mean to the community. I suspect that all councillors who have got those rural areas receive lots of requests or lots of comments around why can't I put a second dwelling on my large lot and what would the impacts be. And I tend to agree at the main point with Councillor Gates that I'm comforted by the fact that Roger made it clear that if this was lodged today, that it really is the site context of this site that lends itself to it, that the 380 metre frontage, the fact that it had existing VXO approvals, and that if anyone after today tries to lodge something similar, that controls like vegetation clearing, bushfire management, VXO approvals, overland stormwater flow, on-site effluent, like the list of things that I have seen stop all of these new proposals that everyone's tried in the last few years to date would still remain in place. However, we always have it up our sleeve that if for some reason Roger's wrong for the first time this decade, if he's wrong and there's floodgates and we start to see things being put forward that we're not happy with, then we update the planning scheme accordingly to deal with it, because protecting those areas and the amenity they bring to those areas is important. And I know something that, especially for Councillor Gates, Councillor and Councillor O'Neill, they have fought very strongly for their time in this place to protect. That said, debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Councillors, we will move to the final item of the day, which is item 6.5. we'll take the presentation.
Through the Chair, this application is for a development permit for a material change of use for a 32-place childcare centre through the alteration of an existing dwelling at number 1 MCCRAE Court, MAUDSLAND. The application is impact accessible and is recommended for approval subject to conditions. The site is a single allotment within a residential cul-de-sac. It has one road frontage to MCCRAE Court and is bound by residential properties. The site adjoins a strip of land to the east that is associated with the adjoining number 7 Greenway Boulevard to the north. MCCRAE Court intersects with Greenway Boulevard, which provides a direct connection to Binstead Way. East of the site lies an open space corridor forming part of the Park Lakes parklands. Greenway Boulevard functions as a key route for school-related traffic, accessing Park Lakes State School that is located a distance of 1 kilometre to the south of the site. The site is located in the low-density residential zone. This zone expressly provides for small-scale non-residential development that is consistent with the strategic framework and that does not detract from the residential amenity of the area. These photos are of the existing dwelling, which will be altered to accommodate the proposed childcare centre. From left to right, up the top, we see the subject site as seen from MCCRAE Court. We also see the existing dwelling house from the front garden and the current interface of the dwelling with the eastern property boundary. The photos from the bottom left show the existing backyard. In the middle there, we can see the sewer easement at the rear, at the back of the site, and the eastern facade as seen from Greenway Boulevard at the bottom right there. The development includes an extension along the eastern side of the building and the demolition of the existing garage. The existing dwelling is largely retained. A new vehicle crossover is provided from MCCRAE Court to the car park area, which provides for 8 car parks, there being 4 staff and 4 visitor car parks. A separate pedestrian entry point is provided via MCCRAE Court. The internal building layout comprises 3 classrooms, supported by bathroom facilities. The outdoor play areas are divided into 2, as shown on this slide, and separated via fencing. The areas of the site that are not accessible to children are the hatched areas, shown here. The centre will cater for 2 age groups, being kindergarten and junior kindergarten, for children aged 3 to 5 years. The operating hours are 7 to 6, Monday to Friday. So these are the elevations of the southern and the northern perspectives. And here we see the eastern and western perspectives. So the key considerations for the development include the residential amenity impacts. In particular, the scale and character, noise impacts, and traffic and transport impacts. The matters raised by the submitters in objection to the application primarily relate to these characteristics. The childcare centre is limited to 32 children, which is considered to be small in scale. The building height, site coverage and setbacks are consistent with those of a residential dwelling. The landscaping includes canopy trees and screening shrubs. It provides an attractive and child-friendly setting that integrates well with the surrounding residential streetscape. In relation to noise impacts, the acoustic report assessment and modelling have demonstrated the development will achieve compliance with the noise criteria. The development is subject to noise mitigation measures, including acoustic fencing, which we can see here. Also building treatments, car park surface treatments to prevent tyre squeal, secure gratings and limited operating hours. In relation to the traffic assessment, it was found there is negligible impacts on the surrounding road network, with intersection operation exhibiting no material change and all the required car parking is accommodated for on site. Officers are satisfied that the development will support safe and efficient movement for all users and integrate effectively with the existing transport network. It is recommended via conditions that yellow no stopping line marking be installed as per this drawing, and a connecting footpath be installed along the site frontage. 71 properly made submissions have been received. These are comprised of 37 objections and 34 in support submissions. The key matters raised by the submitters include noise, traffic, parking, pedestrian safety, character and amenity impacts. Those submissions in support cited local childcare need, small scale, and compatibility with the neighbourhood. Following a detailed review of the submissions, the development includes recommended operational conditions to protect the amenity of nearby residents. In particular, condition number 12 details a structured operational schedule that requires 4 hours of indoor activity per day, a maximum of 4 hours use of the outdoor play area 1, the use of outdoor play area 1 to be only between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m, and the separation of outdoor play activities across the 2 play areas. Also, condition number 5 limits the maximum number of children to 32 and requires that the operator have enrolment information for council inspection. The matters raised by the submitters have been addressed either as part of the assessment process or through recommended conditions in the officer's recommendation. Officers consider that the development is small scale, consistent with the low density residential zone, and will be appropriately managed. The development retains residential character through the reuse of the dwelling, a low-rise built form, landscaping and screening. The development on its merits satisfies the criteria specified in the strategic framework, and therefore is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
The questions for officers, Councillor Curtis and Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I noted the report doesn't provide councillors any detail on the need, and I acknowledge that it says that need isn't an assessment benchmark in the city plan and is not a determinative factor, but in all previous reports that I've ever seen come through this committee where we're looking at activations within primarily residential areas, I've always seen it accompanied with a lot of supporting evidence about need, and whether that's covered like a medical centre, places of worship, and indeed other childcare centres. We've always been presented a lot of information about the needs, and its omission from this one kind of stands out, and I just wanted to better understand why it's not included when it usually always is.
Through the Chair, need is a relevant matter in the assessment of development applications. In this instance, the development complies with the assessment benchmarks, so officers have not considered relevant matters in the assessment of the application, and that's why there's nothing on need.
Councillor Curtis, do you need a bit more explanation of that, of what normally triggers a needs assessment being provided on the relevant matters?
Perhaps what my concern was is when I've seen this played out before in real time and then it's gone to an appeal, it might not be a planning consideration, but it very much plays a prominent role during the appeal process, whether there is a need. And so I guess the absence of that material makes it more difficult to make an informed decision on the likelihood of our success in an appeal, and how this one differs from the ones that we've had previously where we are provided that.
So we might have another, I understood the response, but maybe we could have, because someone else have another crack at explaining the nuance between when relevant matters are triggered and when we would have requested a needs report we provided, and then maybe talk, obviously we don't have an appeal, I can't give legal advice, but just that normally appeals are run on what officers have assessed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is a very small application, 32 children. It's a contemplated use. Often when we're talking about relevant matters, there may be a a significant departure from the planning scheme. This, like I said, 32 children, we're often in the 110, 120 children, not small scale standalone, so there may be some significant non-compliance. So there needs to be a relevant matters argument for that particular scenario. This one, as Monique has correctly said, it's contemplated, complies with the assessment benchmarks, and in our opinion, because of how small scale it is and inconsequential, a needs assessment wasn't considered necessary. But certainly for a much larger application in a different zone, in a different context, yes.
Can a much larger application be considered in the low res zone?
Through you, Mr. Chair, small scale standalone. So if you have an extremely large building that is over 120 children, I don't consider that to be small scale standalone. So you've got a significant non-compliance with the intention and purpose of the city plan.
Yep. Councillor Young, you're next.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll just start with some questions, please. Do you mind please going to your slide 6, Monique? And thank you. I just want to confirm the top left photograph shows the site. Now, that vegetation in the front would be lost with this application and replaced with some other, what I'll call minimalistic landscaping.
Through the chair, the shrubs are shown as to be retained, but the remainder of the vegetation would be removed, yes.
Thank you. And the second photograph, existing dwelling house, that lawn would be replaced with a car park.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I have a question in relation to traffic that's current. So MCCRAE Court is a residential cul-de-sac that includes 11 dwellings. Do we know what the trip generation is from those 11 dwellings, please? I note that the applicant didn't provide a traffic plan or proper traffic assessment. So do we know what the normal trip generation would be, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the standard trip generation rates for a dwelling house suggests it generates about 0.8, 0.85 per dwelling during a peak hour. So as a catchment, it's probably somewhere, I think there's 11 dwellings, so somewhere in, the order of just under 10 trips for a peak hour.
We anticipate 10 trips in the peak hour from the existing. I just want to clarify I've got that right. And then thank you very much. On page 320 of the report, you address other facilities in the vicinity. I'm not sure what slide is best for you to get to, but it was after this one, Monique, that showed a bit broader area. That'll do. So, subject site is marked in red, and on the east of that, there's a swim school identified. And council's going to sell that site. We've resolved that. There's going to be some public benefit out of that, for sure, locally and to the city. But the existing swim school has a car park. It has a building that is designed to accommodate visitation. Do you think, just asking your opinion, I suppose, do you think that would be a better site for a childcare centre rather than this repurposed dwelling? If anyone's wanting to offer an opinion.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, it probably would be a good site for a childcare centre. I'm just going to give the standard response. We've got this application in front of us now, though, for a childcare centre on this site.
Yep. It's mentioned in the report that deliveries are going to be limited to the daytime period between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. Is there a specific condition that governs that, please?
Through you, Mr Chair, we do have condition 6, which undertake all activities including loading and unloading associated with the operation between the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. We have a further condition restricting the outdoor play area, and that actually also 6C, all children are to remain indoors for a cumulative 4-hour period between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Thank you. So it's confirmed the van that's going to supply provisions for the childcare centre must only operate between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m, which is the operational time frame for the entire thing, and that's during which time cars will be parked within the site. And it's so is it been calculated or estimated that the delivery van will be able to come and make deliveries during the operation hours when those car parks may be occupied?
Through the chair, I guess this is it's probably a different type of childcare centre operation to what we're typically used to. It's 32 children, the operator, their owner is the operator, and they have essentially complete control over how the centre will function and operate, and they will have and maintain, I guess, strict oversight about how those things happen. So, yes, there are provisions about that, but it's likely that what will be deliveries will be, if they're providing food for the children, they'll get deliveries of those, and it's our understanding, and I guess we accept this, that they can manage that, and it can be managed in a way where they can say, well, look, we'll take deliveries at this time. This is when our car park is not at its full operation, because obviously, if they keep it outside of 4:30 or the the afternoon peaks or outside of the morning peaks, we're satisfied that they can manage that arrangement with this size of centre that it is. It's not a centre where we're likely to have vast deliveries because there are 130 children to have to prepare meals for.
Through you, Mr Chair, I'd just like to clarify what Phil said. We're all parents of children, and we've dropped off kids at childcare centres, and it's very rare do you actually get parents all coming at the same time. They come at different times throughout the day, and I think the peak hour, it's extremely low amount. So because parents do drop and pick up their kids at different times, I just can't see a conflict between a parent dropping off their child and a delivery van coming. I just don't think that's going to happen, Councillor Young.
No, I understand that that's what we anticipate, but it's not governed by any controls, is it?
Through you, Mr Chair, no. But as Phil has said, the operator has the ability to actually manage the deliveries, because they are operating the operation facility.
Thank you. Why was the applicant not required to provide detailed traffic modelling? Is it just because of the scale?
Through you, Mr Chair, the applicant did submit a traffic impact assessment. The consultant focused more on the requirement for turning lanes at the MCCRAE Court intersection rather than detailed modelling. And I think the view that they took there was that because the traffic generation is quite low, this is a very small boutique centre, so the published trip generation rates suggest something of this scale would generate 22 morning peak hour trips. So that's in and out combined, and 16 in the afternoon. So that's, it's a vehicle trip every 3 to 4 minutes during that sort of peak hour of drop off and pick up, which operationally wouldn't affect the intersection performance. In the abundance of caution, though, we modelled it ourselves within the team, and we found that the average delays for the right turns, which tend to be the worst in delays at an unsignalised intersection, were about 7 to 8 seconds which is well within good operating parameters for an intersection, and the addition of the childcare centre affected those delays by less than 1 second.
Thank you. Your slide 13, please, Monique, showed the provision of new yellow lines to be installed by the applicant. Slide 14, sorry. So does this, could it be considered that this restricts the ability for non-users of the centre to park in the area or to have visitors park?
Through the chair, it's our observations that people don't park within those areas currently. Also, there are public car parks just south of this picture here on Greenway Boulevard, which provides for public car parking within vicinity of this area.
So that was determined from site visits or from the traffic impact assessment submitted, or?
Through the chair, from site visits.
Because I'll just say my site visits often see cars parked in those areas where the yellow lines will be. Further question? You're satisfied that there will be no demand for parking on the street from this facility, associated with this facility?
Through the chair, that's correct, yes.
Your image slide number 13, I think, shows, thank you, the car parks at the bottom of the picture, which is fronting MCCRAE, and behind the house, which is the hatched building, blob, behind that is the covered area, which is to facilitate meals like morning tea, lunch and afternoon tea for 32 children plus 4 staff. That's correct?
Through the chair, yes.
So that covered area, plus their tables and their little chairs and all of that sort of stuff. So 36 people plus provisions in the little covered area behind the building, which is probably smaller than 2 car parks, or certainly smaller than 3. Is that right?
Through the chair, I don't have the size of that area, no.
Just from your observation of the picture that we've got, would you estimate it's bigger or smaller than 3?
Well, it might be helpful perhaps to have a look at the photos that show that area, which I'll just go back. Okay, I didn't include that photo on the slide, but they are in the report. There is a photo of that particular area, and you can see in the picture that there's a table and chairs in that area. Gives an indication of the size.
Can you point us to the page where that... Sorry? Thank you.
Through the chair, the other observation, I guess, also is that, again, there are 3 separate classes within the childcare centre group. So, again, there's restrictions within the conditions about when children can be outside, and it's not anticipated that all the children will be outside at the same time. There's obviously indoor spaces, quite clearly, that they can also utilise. So there's nothing to say that all the children will be outside at the same time. Certainly not playing, that won't be the case. But even during meals times, there's nothing to suggest that some won't be having their meals inside. In fact, all of them won't be having their meals inside, depending on the circumstances.
That's true, but I might just make an observation, which is that condition 12 requires that between 9 and 9:30, all children move to the undercover area for morning tea. From 11:30 to 12, all children are within the undercover area for lunch. from 2 to 2:30 p.m. all children within the undercover area for afternoon tea. So they're the conditions that we're allowing and applying. So therefore it's reasonable to expect that all 32 children plus their 4 teachers plus tables and so forth will be in that little undercover area. That's all I've got for questions. Thanks, Chairman.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to officers. Do we have an example or any examples that we'd be able to be provided with, even perhaps before full council, in relation to other development applications of a similar nature where we see a small scale, centre presented in a low density residential area, just to give some comparativeness to what's being asked here and to look at things like the car parking ratios and other things at other centres. I think that would just be quite helpful. Additionally, and it leads off the back of Councillor Curtis's question around the needs, which I respect the answer. Did we, on any of the, I didn't see it in any of the images provided in the report, but I note there's swim centres, there's schools highlighted. Where's the next closest childcare centre? Unless I've missed it, but I didn't know whether there was somewhere that could be pointed to that said the closest nearby child centre is this way. Like I said, I may have missed it, but I just didn't see that clearly articulated. So, Les.
Through the Chair, I think there's a few points probably there. There's probably the first point about did the applicant provide other examples of similar size childcare centres. I don't, from my recollection, recall that they did, although officers, and again Chris can probably speak to this, did go and have a look at a childcare centre of comparable size in the low density residential zone, not too far away from here, and officers did their own, I guess, stakeout, for want of a better word, of how that, no, that sounds a little bit unusual. They observed how that car park operated, and maybe Chris can provide some more details about what he observed and just put that into context about how this is anticipated to operate in a similar circumstance.
Thanks, Phil. So I did find a childcare centre of near identical scale. It's 28 children in Benoa. It's on a block that is essentially a converted house, so it's very, very similar. It's only 4 children different, and I wanted to do that just to ensure that most of the published rates for childcare centres are based on larger centres, so I just wanted to make sure that it was true and reflective of something of this scale. So I sat there for a couple of hours in the morning and in the afternoon, trying not to look conspicuous, and noted that it was actually quite a low traffic generator. It actually came in below the published rates for trip generation. So there was a vehicle trip every sort of 4 to 5 minutes in the morning and every 6 to 7 minutes in the afternoon peak hour. I found that the arrivals and departures were very dispersed throughout the morning and the afternoon periods. And there were no more than 2 parents on site really at any one time. Mostly 1, sometimes 2. So it kind of confirmed our assessment and gave me confidence as well in the parking supply that the 8 spaces would certainly accommodate the demands of the centre.
I appreciate that, and having a young daughter, I see it daily when I do drop my daughter off, the dispersion of people arriving, coming and going, so I get that. I know it's probably outside the context of the development application itself, but I counted roughly 20-odd parking bays available just across the road at the park there. I noted that there was a crossing, it looked to be somewhat close to that intersection. So I guess from an observational perspective, there would be an ability for people not to necessarily park within the street anyway, given that officers have actually said that they don't see any adverse impacts happening on street parking anyway with the capacity that's been presented. But hypothetically, if someone wanted to park over at the park, which is only a stone throw away from where the DA is being presented, you could theoretically then go up to that crossing point that's actually outside the property, I think, from the map. Is that a fair and reasonable assessment of a parking scenario?
That they certainly could. In my observations of the centre that I visited, there was an abundance of on-street parking as well, and not one parent parked on street. They all preferenced parking on site to drop off their child and sign them in. And that's not to say that it won't happen. You're right, there is a crossing there adjacent to the site. And it's one of the reasons that we're conditioning that yellow line marking on the opposite side of Greenway, because if people do park there, they will obstruct that crossing and the sight lines. It would actually be a very unsafe place for people to park generally. I don't think, to an earlier comment, I don't think people will generally park there during the week, certainly not during peak periods. But we have conditioned that yellow line marking just to open up that intersection and make sure it operates safely and efficiently during those peak hours. It is AO compliant for car parking supply, so I understand the concern you're raising, but it is compliant with the benchmark. And we have also imposed a condition that staff must park on site. So I think the greater impact is, the potential for staff to park on street all day. So we have a condition there that says they must park on site.
Appreciate that response. Can you just give me a bit more further clarity as to regards to the acoustic treatments that we've been presented? Can you just explain to me why some have got that, and it could be just simply the height variation of the land, but some have got that kind of roofing that caves back over to reduce the acoustic impacts, whilst others are set at a 1.8. I think the red line at the top's 1.8, the other's 2.4. Why not use the same acoustic treatment around the entire perimeter there?
Through the chair, this has been taken from the acoustic report. So the acoustic report recommends these particular barriers, and that involves 3 different acoustic barriers, one being 1.8 metres high, which is the red that you see here, another being 2 metres high, which is the blue, and the 2.6, which is the highest, is that purple shaded area. And when I say 2.6, the design, as you can see here in the section, 2.6 is the maximum to that area that is almost like a roof that comes back into the site. At the actual, the height of the fence is 1.8, and then it comes in to the to be the maximum 2.6. So that's what we see here. That's all reflected in the acoustic report. So we've conditioned compliance with those recommended acoustic treatments.
Councillor Gates.
Thank you. Just a question. I didn't see in the report, but did it include how many other childcare centres there are within a 5K radius, for example?
Through the chair, no, it doesn't.
So does anyone know? Or should we ask ChatGPT? I think I will.
I can guess at a couple, but I don't know confidence.
Okay.
And nearest.
Through the chair, I think. Sorry, Councillor. No, I was just going to add, through the chair, I think to Roger's point earlier about the whole need assessment. So, often when we undertake that aspect of an assessment, it's based on, well, what is the need, and can the need be satisfied by a childcare centre that's a kilometre up the road, or that other childcare centre that's 2 blocks around the corner? In this instance, that for the reasons that would I guess mentioned earlier, the scale of this particular childcare centre and the difference in its operation, and that I guess we talk about niche, so to speak, as a description, but it is a very sort of intimate childcare centre that offers a different sort of a childcare model to your regular 120 childcare centres. So there wasn't really that comparison by which you would say, well, there's another 120, there's another childcare centre in this area.
Phil, I'm happy to live with that, Phil. It wasn't a requirement to provide that information. It's not in the report, and we don't have it at hand and can't be confirmed.
And also, with regard to the noise from these children, if they're all outside at the times that Condition 12 suggests, how is that modelled? What level of noise will come from potentially 32 children?
Through the chair, we've got Dirk from our environmental health.
Thank you.
Our environmental health officer can probably.
Through the chair, they use a computer modelling system, and it was actually a worst case, fairly conservative study done as well. Of the children modelled, they actually took the higher level from the older children from a guideline from an acoustic society and modelled that. So they actually predicted good compliance with all children outside at the one time. So the operational measures also recommended as just an additional measure just to reduce amenity impacts as well.
Okay, I live next door to my 2 grandchildren, and I can only imagine what 32 of them, what noise they make. That's just a comment.
A comment about 32 kids, your 2 grandchildren. Okay. More questions?
Only one. Excuse me. In the assessment, obviously, we talked about low intensity and small scale. Is there a table, like through your chair, the comments around 32 being small scale, but if I recall, we were looking at like another DA with indoor sport and rec, and small scale was 15 people. And so is there a table that says this number is small scale, or is it a subjective assessment?
Through the chair, no, there's no table.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Real questioned out. Very good. So we'll move to a recommendation. Understood. In that case, I'm happy to move the recommendation and seek a seconder for debate. Councillor Curtis is happy to second. Councillors, what we're actually going to do, because it's 12:05, we're going to take a 10-minute break before we start debate off proper, just in case we have change recommendations to deal with. I could do with a quick toilet break before we do that. The meeting is resumed at 12:29. Just for those following at home, we're at item 6.5, and I had just moved the officer recommendation, seconded by Councillor Curtis. I was going to open debate very briefly, just by acknowledging that this is a bit of a unique childcare development application versus what we normally see come through committee, where typically we're dealing with ones that are at a much larger scale and the impacts associated with that. This is a much smaller childcare proposal, but it's still a proposal that has gone through public notification and had concerns raised by residents. Some concerns around traffic, some concerns around acoustics, some concerns around it just being the right location in general. After reading all of the available material and having the opportunity both through pre-briefing for this committee, but also through officers here today and the amount of questions asked by councillors, I'm comfortable to support their recommendation that this should be approved on this site. Speaker against the motion, Councillor Young.
Chair, thanks, councillors. I appreciate the fact that it's late in the day and there's another committee about to start. I'll try to be brief, and thank you for your patience through the question process. Clearly, the town plan contemplates this kind of facility within residential areas. It's a service for the residential areas, and it's meant to not compromise the character of the residential areas. And that's where this one comes unstuck, in my opinion, and obviously the opinion of the local people. We had 37 submissions against this, and I recognise we also had some submissions in favour of it, but if you look at the submissions map on page 352, you can see those in favour of it were from far afield and probably have no knowledge of this locality at all, but perhaps have some connection with the applicant or some connection with the company that's going to be providing this service, and therefore they've made their submissions as they're entitled to. They're the blue dots. But in proximity to the proposed site, there's been pretty universal position against this for various reasons. And I'll just address some of those now. First of all, there's this issue of no car parking is allowed on the street. No car parking is contemplated as necessary for this 32 space childcare centre. We all know that you can't guarantee when people will arrive to drop off their kids or pick them up again. It's a bit chaotic at times at childcare centres. Mums and dads want to be able to walk into the centre with their child. They're not going to drop them off at the street. There's limited car parking available on site. There'll be 4 spaces taken up by the staff, potentially 1 space taken up by the delivery van, which at any one time may be delivering, or it might be just waiting there to go and do another run to pick up stores or supplies. So theoretically, there'd be 5 car parking spaces taken. That leaves 3 available to the visiting patrons. And as I say, people are unlikely to drop the kids off at the curb. They're going to want to park either within the site or near it. There's only 3 or 4 spaces available to them, and within the site and on the street there'll be yellow marking, meaning no stopping. And I think that that's an unrealistic expectation and outcome. I think it will have impacts. I think it will be evident to people as the operation goes ahead. People in the street who live there will be compromised. Their amenity will be compromised by the fact that there'll be cars juggling around and doing U-turns in the street, in the cul-de-sac, to try to get the right spot right out the front and deposit their kids. We've got vehicle trip generations rising from a current 10 in the peak hour, 10 vehicles in the peak hour from the current homes will elevate to an anticipated number of 30. So it's 3 times the current traffic volumes, shall we say, in the street. And that's got to be compromising the character and amenity of that street. The people that have lived there have made their investment in buying a house. That's it. That's their mortgage. That's where all their money goes. and they're seeing their quality, the amenity of their life eroded by a significant increase in the volume of traffic. It's not significant in the scheme of comparing to the motorway or a major arterial road, but in the scheme of their little street, which currently has 10 vehicle movements in the peak hour, going to 30 vehicle movements in the peak hour, that's considerable. We've got the area that was identified for the children to attend and have their lunch and morning tea and so forth. It's a very small space. It really is about the space of 2 car parking spaces. So we all know what a car parking space looks like. Imagine 2 of them, maybe a tiny little bit more space, and there's going to be 32 children plus the teachers in there for 3 periods of 30 minutes a day. I don't think that's realistic. I think those kids are going to spill out from there, from the covered area, into the backyard, which they're not meant to be occupying during those times. So then it's going to be very difficult to control what happens on the site at any one time. And we shouldn't be relying upon all of the neighbours to be watching and observing and keeping a record of how many kids are in this area and how many kids are in that area out of hours. And we can't rely upon the applicant to do that monitoring. So I just think it's ungovernable and unrealistic, and therefore those things will mean that there will be a compromise to the amenity and the living conditions of neighbours in particular. Further to that loss of residential amenity will be the removal of significant planting at the streetscape, at the street frontage now, including a big lawned area. So it really presents now as just a typical residential house. It's going to be replaced with car parking, a big slab of concrete, a few little plants, and maybe 1 or 2 canopy trees along the boundary. It's the presentation to the street is really going to differ from all of the other houses around. It may not in itself be significant, but it's not going to be consistent with the character of all of the other houses in the area. And that's our decision. Should we allow that? Should we allow that to be eroded by this particular application? I believe we shouldn't. I think it's clearly evident this could be achieved, this outcome could be achieved on another site nearby. That's not before us as an application today, but for us to bear in mind, there is an alternative site which, if there had been an application on it, would be much more agreeable. It wouldn't compromise the character of the area. It wouldn't compromise those residential characteristics, and it would have appropriate and adequate car parking. It would have appropriate and adequate access to, in a very safe way for pedestrians, off the street. For these reasons and more, Mr. Chairman, I'm not supporting the application and your motion. I have no criticism of the officers in their evaluation. I think they've done a very thorough job. They've looked intently at the issues raised by the community in the submissions made, and I'm appreciative of that, and also the opportunity to have a discussion with the officers a couple of times. So there's no criticism. I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate, as I said, that the town plan contemplates this kind of thing, but I cannot support this, and I would ask any other councillors who feel similarly of that mind to not vote in favour of this. Chairman, if this motion does not succeed, I'll just foreshadow now that I'll present a motion of refusal. Thank you.
Speaker for the motion? No. Councillor Curtis?
Thank you, Chair. And I make this statement reluctantly because I just want to acknowledge that the concerns raised by submitters, that my support today is in no way a reflection or a dismissal or a disregard of their concerns. I just want to highlight that we have an obligation to our ratepayers to make planning decisions that reflect the planning scheme, and that doesn't necessarily always reflect the community sentiment on individual matters. And so, you know, it's probably not quite accurate to say it is our decision, because ultimately it is how the planning application sits against the legal document in which it's required to be assessed against. And when these matters end up being resolved during an appeal process, that comes at a great expense to the public purse. The officers in attendance today have provided some fantastic guidance and advice, even offline, of other appeal processes where we've seen similar outcomes. And I'm confident that the decision here today, could go a different way in an appeal, and I would like to avoid that cost and burden to our ratepayers, and so I will support the officer's recommendation in this instance. Thanks.
Speaker against the motion, Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chairman. I personally just can't get past the fact that in the strategic framework it suggests that any small-scale operation must not detract from the residential amenity of the area. So whilst I respect the work that the officers have done, there's no doubt in my mind that this does affect the amenity of the neighbourhood, the residential amenity in the low-density zone. It is severely affected in terms of visual amenity by replacement of all the green space with a concrete slab. In my view, it's impacted, despite the fact that there has been a noise report provided, an acoustic report. It most definitely will have an impact, having 32 children in the outside area, on the neighbouring properties. It will also, in my view, have parking impacts. I think any of us who have a number of schools in our division, and I used to have 18 and now I've got 14, and I can't tell you one example of where parents actually park a little way away and walk their child in. They all want to stop at the door or in the kiss and go zone. So there's no, the parking restrictions that are going to be implemented with the yellow line, that's going to restrict other residents from having people park close to their homes. I just would hate to have this development occur next to me, and I know that that doesn't come into any version of any planning scheme ever, what the impact would be. But I really think when we are the responsible party for making these decisions, the planning scheme doesn't always get it right, and that's where it comes to us to make a decision based on experience, and that's what I'm doing today. So I'm sorry to say, but because of the things mentioned and the fact that there are 11 centres within proximity to this application where any additional requirements, I have no doubt, could be met without having an impact on a small cul-de-sac where there are 10 other properties.
Speaker for the motion, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. And this one I did struggle on with today's committee meeting because I think that there's some merit both for and against. But overwhelmingly, I'm now supportive of this particular one, and I'd echo some of what Councillor Curtis has actually said in relation to the submissions that we receive. We certainly don't dismiss those. It's certainly then looking at what I think everyone's more or less touched on is the city plan and the provisions within the city plan. And unfortunately, I can't see any grounds as such, whilst it could be disputed, for a refusal in that regard. But I also think that this does actually offer a further diversification of offerings for childcare services within the Maudsland community and possibly further abroad. Although there are, as Councillor Gates touched on, 11 centres close by, even just having a quick Google of some of those, they are very different in what they actually offer. And I think that that's not a bad thing for communities at times, is to have selection and different choice. As far as the submissions that we did receive, there was almost equal fors and against. And again, I respect all the views that were put forward as part of that process. The conditions that were set out in this particular report, I think, are very clear as what is to be acceptable upon that site. And again, I think it sets very clear parameters for what hours of operation and when you could expect people to be there. I'd also, I guess, from a personal level of experience, just seeing how when DAs do get approved at times, it doesn't mean that they eventuate. We may not actually see anything come to be. We've got to wait to see, even if that particular centre fills up with people. Which brings me, I guess, to another point that's been raised through this discussion is looking at things that that we can say, well, hypothetically, what could occur, and we could look at other sites perhaps that are nearby and say that they could be better. But at the end of the day, that is a hypothetical that may never be realised. And so what we have to do is make a decision with what's in front of us here and now. And I guess I will be supporting this today. But however, if someone wanted to throw something up at full council, I keep my mind open and persuadable as always.
Speaker against the motion? Okay, so I'm going to close debate. And I appreciate this. It's always amazing when you've got an item that you don't think is going to take quite so long, but through the amount of questions and amount of debate on this one, I've been proven wrong once again. But for me, I come back to impacts. So, and from the questions and from the debate, what impacts have been raised. So I've heard impacts around loss of on-street car parking. Now, my first thing goes to, if there's 10 houses in the cul-de-sac, how many of those people are actually home during the day when there's going to be an impact from this? Like, I doubt that people are home in every one of those 10 houses. So that reduces the amount of people that could be impacted by it. And the impact they would feel is possible loss of on-street car parking. But as was pointed out, that may be, if it occurred, only use of on-street car parking for drop-off or pick-up. So maybe for 15 minutes. Versus, as of right, any one of those 10 houses with older kids or someone else living there can park a car on the street all day if they wish. So I don't really accept loss of on-street car parking as an impact, because that could occur either way through here. And I think a few people have mentioned the experiences. Most parents wish to be in the car park to drop their kids up and pick them up, and I think that will be what happens here as well. So for me, the more important impact was actually around acoustics. So I'm not so concerned about loss of on-street car parking. That can happen through a scenario of things. But acoustics for people immediately adjoining, I will rely upon the fact that an RPEQ engineer has provided an acoustic report suggesting that through appropriate treatments, which we had some more detail on, that those acoustic issues can be dealt with. So I'm not concerned by that impact, because I'm going to guess that Councillor Gates raised the point of hearing her grandchildren next door. There's no acoustic fence between your properties. So what will be here is an appropriate acoustic fence certified by an acoustic engineer to deal with those noise impacts. I was interested in the landscaping comments and that amenity piece from Councillor Young and Councillor Gates. I'm not concerned by that, because as the owner of that house, I can go wipe that landscaping tomorrow if I wish. That's as a right. I can go remove every single one of those trees. I can put up a 2-metre solid fence if I wish. So I'm not concerned by loss of amenity when the owner has got rights to do things on their property, including removing every single piece of that vegetation and putting up a fence on the property if they wish. There will be an acoustic fence along the front of this property with some landscaping in front of it. Will it look quite as beautiful as what's there now? No, but is it appropriate for what's left there, and acknowledging the use rights on the property? I'm comfortable with that. I'm a bit interested in too, and only speaking for my own division, but nearly every childcare centre I have in my division is next door to LDR housing. Like, it's fairly typical. An estate gets built and they carve off one corner where a childcare centre gets built. Like, it's fairly traditional, definitely up my way. Like, I think every one of my childcare centres has houses immediately up next to it. Now, I'm going to guess each of those childcare centres has got acoustic fencing most likely there, but I can confidently say I have not had a complaint in 6 years from anyone who lives next door to a childcare centre about noise from a childcare centre. My lived experience as a councillor for 6 years with a lot of childcare centres right next door to residential is that I haven't had impact concerns raised with me. I think too, Councillor Gates compared school drop-off and pick-up at a school with this childcare centre. I don't know if that's really a contextual example I'm going to accept. School drop-off and pick-off is at very specific times. It's typically for 1,000 plus students in a hit as well. This is 32 kids, and for those of us who have kids and drop them off at childcare, I think it's a very fair point from officers that not all 32 kids get dropped off at once. It happens over a few hours. We've had officers out on site visits confirming that from other similar scale ones. So I don't think at all that it's going to be a similar experience to what we have around our school zones. I am confident that this is at the very small scale end of things, and that all of the appropriate conditions that are required to mitigate impacts around acoustics and car parking and other treatments have been put in place. and therefore I'm happy to support the officer recommendation for approval. Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. Councillor Young, would you like division? Division is called. All those in favour?
Councillor Hamill, Councillor Curtis, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor O'Neill.
Against?
Councillor Young, Councillor Gates, Councillor Martin.
The motion is carried. Councillors, I don't have any general business item presented to me beforehand, so unless there's anything of an urgent matter at the end, I'm going to close the meeting at 12:49. Thank you.